Brasil y Colombia se unen para organizar el Congreso Latinoamericano de la Cuarta Revolución Industrial. Un evento virtual que se realizará el 30 de noviembre y 1 de diciembre a partir de las 8 horas Colombia y 10 horas Brasil, y en el que participarán actores de alto nivel. Acompáñanos a conocer el impacto, avances y desafíos de las tecnologías emergentes en la región. Regístrate sin ningún costo y en línea. www.congresolatam4ir.com.
Día para todos. Good morning, everyone. Bon dia. Bienvenidos al segundo.
Welcome to the second and final day of the Latin American Congress on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. I'm Maria Carolina Hoyo, and I will be with you on day 2. Today we're going to have 2 segments on which we're going to debate. First, the transition of Latin America towards a data-based economy, and second, ethical and regulatory frameworks for responsible use of emerging technologies. At the end, the directors, the heads of the C4IR centers in Colombia and Brazil, Eres Sayons and Lucas Cámaras, will have a conversation where they're going to be discussing the ideas and conclusions from this event, as well as the upcoming events, results, and activities in our countries. I would like to remind you that this event is being broadcast live, and it's available in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, and it's also available in the original language. Please just select the language you desire. Before we continue, we'd like to invite you all to follow us on social media. Follow the C4IR centers in Colombia and Brazil. So let's move on to our introductory video for today's session.
Económica. La inestabilidad geopolítica y las desigualdades sociales son algunos de los desafíos a los cuales se enfrenta América Latina actualmente. Por eso, como región, está en la tarea de acelerar la búsqueda de soluciones que estimulen la transformación y evolución. La economía impulsada por las tecnologías emergentes de la Cuarta Revolución Industrial marcan un camino positivo como solución a este panorama. Por esto se busca potencializar una economía digital y establecer un lenguaje común para toda la región, teniendo una visión que fortalece las estrategias, iniciativas y programas regionales que fomenten el desarrollo sostenible, apoyados en tecnologías 4.0. La transformación digital es una realidad y ha llegado aceleradamente. Las plataformas digitales nos invitan a transformar la manera de hacer las cosas, de realizar negocios transfronterizos al reducir costos y crear mercados y comunidades globales con intereses en común. Se trata de buscar una mejora en la economía para promover la competitividad en la región a través de los beneficios que ofrecen las tecnologías emergentes. Bienvenidos una vez más al Congreso Latinoamericano de la Cuarta Revolución Industrial.
En la apertura de este evento tendremos.
Joining us for today's opening, we're going to have authorities from Colombia and Brazil. Víctor Muñoz, the head of the Administrative Department of the Republic of Colombia. Patricia Ellen, president of the C4IR Brazil and secretary of Economic Development, Science and Technology of the state of Sao Paulo. Also joining us will be Danielle Quintero, Mayor of Medellin, and Jacqueline Concas, Undersecretary of Innovation and Digital Transformation at the Ministry of the Economy in Brazil.
It's an
honor for me to join you today at this Latin American Congress of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, a partnership between Colombia and Brazil, where we have an opportunity not only to learn about the progress, but the work that has been carried out in centers around the world. Colombia adopted This administration, from the beginning, adopted a digital transformation policy, because you cannot talk about the fourth industrial revolution without a digital transformation. Since the beginning of our government, we made decisions to convert everything to cloud computing, to make sure every government agency could work with cloud computing. Second, having a clear policy on smart cities and territories, working with IoT, which is one of the elements of the fourth industrial revolution. How during the pandemic, database decisions became even more important. We came up with training programs to massify that knowledge at the various institutions and various entities. When you continue moving forward, cloud computing, of course, enables us to run various epidemiological models to have faster results and better react during the pandemic. So the message is the digital transformation that the country has undertaken, the regulation we have put in place, the multiple projects that agencies have in place have been crucial not only during the pandemic, but also to ensure we can continue moving forward in economic development. Incorporating blockchain to our processes, or AI. Colombia is a leader in the region. The ethical framework and a smart artificial intelligence policy is really important. A few weeks ago, a new initiative was launched by Mrs. Villalba, and the international experts, mission where senators will be coordinating that group to help Colombia build a roadmap to make sure all the right decisions are in place to implement AI. Second, work on ethical frameworks. Third, seek to protect the environment with IoT and AI. And fourth, it's really important to close the gaps and to ensure this is an opportunity for us to have equitable, sustainable development for everyone. This is not a matter of technology. This involves everyone in terms of access to services, e-commerce, access to banking, fintech solutions, cloud solutions, and all of that is part of the ecosystem and the foundation that makes it possible for us to continue moving forward with virtual education, housing, and other projects. Having said that, we are moving forward as a country. The fourth industrial revolution is a reality, and we are bringing together all the right digital transformation connectivity policies with elements of the fourth industrial revolution, with innovation, to ensure that as a country we can continue moving forward and be fully involved in the fourth industrial revolution, instead of just being followers adopting these technologies far into the future.
Olá, é prazer estar aqui. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you today and speak on behalf of Governor João Dória and the government of São Paulo. I'm here as Secretary of Development, Science and Technology and Chairman of the Fourth Industrial Revolution Center in Brazil. We have a center that is linked to this forum, and I'm very honored today to chair this group. I'm here today with the Global Leader, and I really appreciate this Global Forum, all the work that has been done. I would like to greet all my colleagues in the forum, especially my friend Marisol, who is the government leader for this economic forum, and also to greet Danielle Quintero, Mayor of Medellin. We see Medellin as a benchmark. I have seen many of the great deeds that have been carried out, especially regarding urban planning and the life in less favorized neighborhoods, and we've been working on the planning of neighborhoods in São Paulo. I would also like to greet all our partners in the Fourth Industrial Revolution Center in São Paulo, Abimed, our chairman, Fasmogenica, AstraZeneca, Brasão, Eletrobras, Metal, and Qualcomm. And I will remind you that in this Fourth Industrial Revolution Center in Brazil, in São Paulo, we have a differentiated model that is very innovative so that private companies participate in partnership with the São Paulo state government and the federal government. And together we can apply new technologies so that we can have a model in which we'll have a sustainable economic growth that is more inclusive and more innovative. We know that technologies, when well used, can accelerate the process of developing of and adding value to society, fighting inequality, improving quality of life, and improving the use and efficiency of public and private resources. In the second day of this Latin American Congress on the Fourth Industrial Revolution, we will talk precisely about the transition that Latin America is going through for an economy based on data. We will also have a specific debate on regulatory and ethical frameworks for the responsible use of technology and emerging markets. Both these topics are extremely important so that in Latin America we can have this economic development model that is both more innovative and more sustainable and more inclusive, with the insertion of the production chains and into the global production chains of products and technical services. We also want Brazil, especially the state of São Paulo, becomes a great power in the technological sector. And we remind you that the state of São Paulo, with the governor Jean, has increased its investment in technology and science. We have a very challenging reality in Brazil. We had a decrease in the budget for science and technology that less than half of what it was 2 years ago. So we had an increase in the government of São Paulo in investments for science and technology. With this, we are delivering this year and next year the greatest budget directed at science and technology in the story of the history of the state. And we're talking here a 21 billion real investment with these funds. We intend to ensure that São Paulo will be a benchmark in innovative investments in São Paulo. We see that São Paulo is responsible for over 80% of the investment in state-of-the-art technology in São Paulo. And we will now give the floor to Stephan.
Basic investigation and scientific investigation in Brazil. We have a great responsibility with this to apply this technology to face the major international and domestic challenges. This is why we have invested in health in the fight against pandemic. In São Paulo, we have the highest rate of vaccination, and Brazil is one of the countries that has moved forward a lot with vaccination. 75% of the adult population is with a full scheme of vaccination. So this is managed based on data and evidences, and this makes a difference. And we have more than 7% of economic growth this year. So this is a record in terms of entrepreneurship. These are just a couple of examples of the actions that we've been taking. The purpose is also to invest in more in agribusiness, science, advanced manufacturing, and especially in the economic development models that is sustainable. We also launched some partnerships during the COP so that we can make the difference in the fight against climate change and also for the preservation of forests. Thank you all and enjoy the forum. And I would also like to thank on my behalf and on behalf of the governor of São Paulo. Technologies with a good regulatory framework and good investment infrastructure and good conduct code can really help Latin America to be a benchmark in the fight against inequality and also to be a model of inclusive, innovative model of economic development. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Daniel Quintero, the mayor of Medellín in Colombia. I would like to
organizaciones, empresas y ciudadanos que trabajan en el diseño e
thank the
implementación
governments and citizens who work in the design and implementation of public policy and governance for emerging technologies in Latin America, and welcome them to the second day of the Congress on the Fourth Industrial Revolution in Latin America to discuss the challenges we're facing as a region in terms of the responsible use of emerging technologies. Our goal is to bring Latin America's transition to a data-driven, data-based transition. This is the way to build cities and therefore regions that are moving towards a more equitable, inclusive future for all citizens. We will be faithful to our purpose of moving forward based on the experiences we have gained in Colombia, and always willing to share with the rest of our neighbors in Latin America.
Bom dia a todos. Inicialmente, eu gostaria de
Good
parabenizar.
morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to congratulate the representatives of the affiliated centers for the Fourth Industrial Revolution of Brazil and Colombia for the excellent initiative. Yesterday, we had a very good event, and surely this will also be a success. It is always a great satisfaction to attend events of the C4IR, of which the federal government is a founding member here in Brazil. Also, I'd like to greet the fellows of the government, members of this panel, and all the participants, as well as several other countries in Latin America. We share several challenges of competitiveness and productivity that impact so much our welfare and our quality of life. One of the ways to face these challenges is precisely through the dissemination and adoption of technologies. I believe that during these 2 days of Congress, we'll be able to explore the opportunities for transformation through the so-called technologies of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. I believe that this effect shows very importantly the importance of raising awareness to the benefits of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. This will become clear and tangible throughout the event. For example, in Brazil, we've been bringing digitalization and Internet of Things solutions to thousands of companies with the program Brazil Mais. All this is based on a methodology developed in a partnership with the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. It's a methodology that is also being shared as a success story with many other countries and many other emerging countries. With the C4IR, we also preparing a guide for public managers so that they can carry out the public purchases of artificial intelligence in an ethical and responsible manner. This guide should serve as a basis for the improvement of the international version of the World Economic Forum Guide. This initiative is relevant, especially in the context we are today. In the National Congress, there is a legal framework being discussed regarding artificial intelligence in Brazil. We believe that legislation on this topic should not be rigid or extensive, given the early stage of development of these technologies. It is very important that flexibility is maintained in order to stimulate experimentation and scientific and technological development and innovation. Also, I would like to highlight the contribution of technology to achieve more sustainable standards of production and consumption, which is also something very recurrent in these 2 days of Congress. At the Special Secretariat of Productivity and Competitiveness of the Ministry of Economy in Brazil, we believe that our country, with technology research and development, can be a world leader in sustainable low-carbon mobility. Our intention is to make our automotive hub be the first in the world to define energy efficiency and emission targets, taking into account the full cycle of fuel. And several initiatives have already been developed and deployed, such as the Fleet Renewal Program and also logistic corridors and tax reduction programs for hybrid electric vehicles. And for more challenging energy efficiency targets, we also have an incentive or R&D for new technologies to have more efficient engines and so forth. Likewise, we also have to mention agribusiness. Brazil is already in a leading position in this field due to the incorporation of technology and research. But now, with the new technologies of the fourth industrial revolution and the internet and 5G coming to the field, we can also achieve higher levels of productivity, efficiency, and sustainability. In this sense, ABB has recently completed the first call of the Agro 4.4 program. We have got several excellent results for the adoption of 4.0 technologies agribusiness. For example, there were projects that could reduce by 70% the use of herbicides and insecticides or pesticides, and reduction of 30% in the volume of water. And also, this increases the margin of profit for farmers. The initiative of the centers and the World Economic Forum to hold this Congress is not only welcome, but also it is extremely necessary in order to disseminate the good practices and good initiatives such as this that I have just mentioned. This shows that the pilot programs and tests have worked out and they have resulted in good outcomes. And this is supported by ABB and other associations or institutions. And this is fundamental for the dissemination of the benefits about the technologies of the fourth industrial revolution. With these partnerships, it is combined with the private sector, we can enable the society to enjoy the enormous benefits of the so-called fourth industrial revolution in a sustainable way. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I wish you all an excellent event. Thank you.
Gracias, Jacqueline. Bien, ahora
Thank you, Jacqueline. Now we're going to move on to our next segment, Latin America's transition to a database economy. So our first keynote is going to be the data-driven economy, a new paradigm, by Didier Navaz, Senior Vice President of Strategy and Partnerships at Dowex. Didier is a thought leader in the domains of digital and data strategy, data and mobile devices. And for over 10 years, he worked with the leading technology research firms, Gartner and Forrester, advising technology and business leaders on their digital transformation journeys in Europe and North America. Go ahead, Didier, you have the floor. Good morning for you.
Thank you very much. Very happy to be here. Thanks for having me. So let me just say, maybe introducing myself a little bit, information about the company I'm probably representing today, Dowex. Dowex is a company that has built a business, and with a sole mission is to facilitate the circulation of data amongst organizations of many types, private, public, large, small. This mission, we had it by just observing on the market that there was an explosion of data being produced. Think about all these IoT devices around the planet. There was also an explosion of the data demand. Think about AI and the fact that for training algorithms, you need a lot of data. And a single organization generally doesn't have enough of its own data to do what they want to do. So they have to find it somewhere else. and finding somewhere else, obviously you can go on open data portal, having public data, but a lot of the time, the data resides in silos at corporations, at companies, and it's challenging to get access to that data. So there was a real need for setting up the framework so that those data can circulate at scale and can be more easily exchanged. So that was really the mission of a company. So I will start with very, very basic definitions and what do we mean by data exchange and exchanging data? Well, it's a process. It's a process of exchanging all the data between those who have those data and those who need it. And those processes it's much more than a technical process, just passing information through. It's a process that will have different level of implication. There's a marketing element, a data product marketing element. If you want to show to others what data you have and find the conditions for those others to use this data, you have that dimension. You have obviously a legal and a regulatory element that is going to be discussed today. There's obviously a technical one, but there will be many different layers, and it's not only technical aspects. But what is very fascinating is that data exchange also not only a process, but it's the place where data is being exchanged. Think about stock exchange, commodities exchange, and these places are trusted. They have to be highly secure and compliant also with regulation. Actually, we envision that data economy is going to be regulated as much, even maybe more than the financial markets in the future. So that being said, when talking about data exchanges in terms of those places where data can be exchanged between various participants, what we envision is, and what we see actually on the market, is that there are multiple initiatives that are taking place in various countries, regions, in various industries. And some are driven by the public sector, some are driven by the private sector. It is really happening. And what we are also envisioning for the future is that those ecosystems, those marketplaces will eventually interconnect with each other, which is going to unlock even more value to all the participants in that broad data economy. So I'd like to focus a little bit on those places where data can be exchanged, and let's call them data exchange platforms. Some will talk about data marketplace, or we can talk about data hubs. There are different terminology, and some differences between those environments. But let's talk today about data exchange platforms. So basically, it's a piece of technology, but as I was mentioning, doing a lot of things, and addressing many challenges and many topics which are non-technical. And generally, it's a custom branded, because all these initiatives I was mentioning, those ecosystem, they have a very different missions and scope. So they will be branded differently. They are typically fully configurable because, again, the way they're going to operate might be different. It's generally offered in a SaaS type platform, and they are there to help participants to distribute their data, to source data, to commercialize and share. And for those who are orchestrating those ecosystems, there's also a bigger activity that is actually developing right now. It's this activity of orchestrating those data ecosystems and operating them. So what are the characteristics that these environment have to provide? They have to implement a strong data exchange governance model. I mentioned those different dimensions. They have to support open data and commercial data exchanges. And that's important because there's been a lot of effort, and that is great, around open data and on internet to make data available to the public, to those who want to access those data. But commercial data is also important, and they have to be exchanged and shared and combined in an easy way, and through data marketplace and data exchange. It has also to have the capabilities of managing all types of data exchanges. So all types of data, all types of ways of making those data available through files exchange, through APIs, real time, and between very different stakeholders. Can be large corporations, government entities, startups, academia, and all the key stakeholders, economic stakeholders in the society. And last but not least, it has to be capable of having an economic model behind to generate revenue. This is important also because in terms of financial sustainability of such environment, this is important that there is an ability to, I would say, to monetize those environments. And there are different ways for that, and I will just discuss it a little bit later in my presentation. So on that particular subject, what is the business model and the revenue model behind those environments? Of course, you have the participants to those data exchange or data marketplaces, and they can make their data available in different ways, freely, where data is distributed free of charge. And that is obviously possible. It's not only open data. There are also commercial data being offered free of charge. Think about the situation that we all live with the COVID-19. A number of private corporations have made some of their data available in order to progress on some objectives, in order to address this crisis that we're all living. And it obviously can be offered in a paid mode. But important is to also see that the orchestrator or those who are operating those exchanges must find ways to have some financial sustainability. Of course, they can provide access to their environment free of charge, free access, or they can also work in a freemium model and provide different levels of services that are provided, for example, access to certain type of information or certain functionalities, and ask for some access fee to access the environment. And there's also the model of pay as you use, where basically the orchestrator can take a small cut on every transaction that is a monetized transaction that is happening on the marketplace. And by the way, those different business models can be combined, and every implementation of a data exchange environment will have its own rule and will define what is best based on its mission and scope. If I'm zooming in a little bit on the key capabilities of a data marketplace or a data exchange environment, it has to provide ways for the supply and the demand to meet, so that they have to be able to present what they have, publish it on a data offerings catalog, provide tools for those who search so that they can easily discover the data, provide ways for those to engage and exchange data. And I will not have the time today to go into more detail, but basically there are a number of steps that involve the actual exchange of data. And I'd like just to mention one element here, which is that you see register and onboard. A marketplace, in order to grow and build trust, they need to actually build trust and trust can be obtained in different ways, and I'll speak a little bit more later. But basically, just registering, knowing who you are dealing with transparently may be an essential element of trust in any marketplace. And as you see, there are multiple functionality that are needed so that parties can meet each other. They can engage, discuss, negotiate, execute transactions and payments, and eventually exchanging or sharing data in different ways through files and an API I was mentioning. And last but not least, it's also for the orchestrator of a data exchange environment or a data marketplace, it's to have a number of develop capabilities for managing all those participants, stimulating activity, because it's not just a technology thing, like you put a platform and everybody's going to use it. You need to stimulate and help engagement develop, a monitoring activity for better performance and quality of the interactions, and to manage the business model. Now, who's interested by those data exchanges and why? And let me share with you a few examples of initiatives we've been directly involved in. For example, in France, there's a big initiative which is partially funded by it's part of the French recovery plan, and it's where you have a private-public involvement with Banque des Territoires, Amadeus, the big travel company, and we are tooling them and providing our technology there. It's a data hub which helps bringing security and traceability of all data exchange and in compliance with regulations, addressing the tourism industry, involving all the key stakeholders, private and public, that are involved in the tourism industry and ecosystem in France. Another interesting initiative, which has a vertical focus, is this big initiative announced recently, which is the Space Data Marketplace, where my company, Dawex, is leading a consortium made of very famous and large corporations in the space. Dassault System, Thales Alenia, and a number of very innovative AI and data startups that bring the ability to build a number of use cases leveraging satellite data. The objective really is to build a one-stop shop for spatial data. There are already different ways of accessing spatial data, but it's not that necessarily that easy. So the idea with this big initiative is to satellite data for any type of organization that can take advantage of this. And the use case will be in the environment, but it can be also commercial, like addressing the last mile for logistic, for delivery goods, and so many different types of use case. Another one, for example, is the agriculture sector, where Ag Data Hub is a company that is operating data platform for data exchange, but also for data consent. And Dawex is also providing its technology for addressing this. The objective for Ag Data Hub is to build an environment that is really helping all those participants in the agriculture, which is increasingly data-driven business, but operating in a sovereign environment. There's also a competition coming from everywhere with the big digital natives that's coming into the market. And this initiative is typically around keeping sovereignty on the French and European agriculture. another one is in the food industry, another industry where there is a lot of interest. There, the notion is really about traceability of data, and so that's another initiative. Or far away in Japan, the Japan Data Exchange is the first global data marketplace in Japan, and that's a very interesting initiative. It's an initiative which is privately driven by a trading organization that has been trading goods for 130 years and is now actually seeing the data as the next asset that will be massively traded. Just to finish my presentation, I would like to share a couple of key criteria for success. Obviously, we could speak on many different subjects, but let me focus on a couple of one. I mentioned the word trust. Building a trusted environment for data exchange, this is essential. For adoption, for growth of any data exchange or marketplace. And we could speak about trusting the data providers, but let me focus on trust in the data marketplace, Orchestrator. And in order to build that trust, first of all, is to, if you are engaging in implementing a data exchange environment, it's very key to define your mission. The goal may be very different. It could be building an environment for the common good. The Moonshot project that is run by the C4IR Colombia is an excellent example, run with the GCPI initiative with the World Economic Forum of building the framework for a data exchange or data marketplace for the common good. It's important to study the what, who, and why. And what do I mean by that? Is to have a good understanding about what are the data assets which have the biggest value potential. It's about who might be interested by such data. And that's the ecosystem that we're talking about. And why would they be interested? That's the use case. These are the three major elements that any organization engaging in data exchange have to work and think about and deliver some results. There are ways to do that, and it's important to do that quickly. Follow a structured methodology to do that, to answer those questions, and it has to be fast-tracked. It's not about months and years of analysis. This work can be done rapidly to have a high-level but very accurate view of what's the potential of data exchange. And another point I would like to mention is regarding building trust is the importance of the neutrality and fairness of the data exchange orchestrator. And especially when an orchestrator, you have private initiatives. An organization may say, I'm building my environments just to distribute my own data. That's not the case. But as soon as you are putting yourself in a central role for orchestrating an ecosystem, neutrality is essential. And defining clearly the rules of the game. What's the purpose and the mission? And incentivize participants, which is not only incentivizing by money, but by other means also. And being clear about the objective, what you're trying to achieve, is one way of doing that. And of course, there's the importance of regulatory frameworks. I was mentioning in the beginning of my presentation that the data economy is going to be increasingly regulated. We all know that. And it touches personal data. Think about GDPR in Europe, which has actually been followed in many countries, and there are a lot of similarity now between various regulations around the world about how you treat and how you protect the use of personal data. But there is also non-personal data, and there is a number of elements that are being discussed today with the Data Governance Act in Europe, which is going to address not only the non-personal data and the exchange, but also the role of the data exchange orchestrator. I will end up my presentation here. I would like to thank you for giving me the time to speak today, and enjoy your day at the Congress. Thank you very much.
Didier, muchas gracias. Bien, y con esta...
Didier, thank you very much. And with this great introductory presentation, let's begin with a panel. Latin Americans' transition towards a driven data economy. First, we will have Sheila Warren from the World Economic Forum. She is deputy head of the C4IR network, as well as blockchain and digital assets of the World Economic Forum. Sheila will introduce our moderator, Stephan Verpulse. Stephan is co-founder of the Laboratory of Governance, GovLab, a New York University research center focusing on improving decision-making using progress in science and technology, including collective intelligence data. Let's begin with Sheila in order to open this very important space. Go ahead, Sheila.
Welcome, everyone. It's my great pleasure to invite you to join me in listening to this excellent panel we've prepared for today on Latin America's transition to a data-driven economy. As the head of the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution Network, based out of San Francisco, it's my great privilege and honor to work with centers all around the world in promoting and propelling the benefits and negotiating the challenges that new technologies bring to our world and our society. Data, of course, is the foundation for a lot of these technologies. And what's happening in Latin America is of particular excitement to us here at the Forum and at the Center. In mid-December, we'll be launching a new paper focusing specifically on Latin America. It's going to talk about the governance of cross-border data to enable regional projects based on the use of data and 4.0 technologies. We're looking specifically today at the design of the data governance model of Colombia, which is propelling a similar approach to data governance in Brazil, and one that we hope will scale all across Latin America. There are, of course, challenges in the creation of a common framework to enable this transition, which we'll hear about from our expert panelists today. Regulatory frameworks, in addition, can provide a lot of challenge in the cross-border perspective. How do we enable development of projects and the generation of trusted data exchanges in Latin America, but also around the world? But here today, we'll hear about the specific economic, social, and environmental challenges in Latin America and how such data exchanges can help consent and trust. Our Data for Common Purpose Initiative community has focused specifically on this as one of the major work streams of our initiative. And in fact, there's a pilot happening that you'll hear about with the city of Medellin and our C4IR Center in Colombia to strengthen this strategy. I don't want to give too much away, but it's called Valle del Software. Data-driven innovation in Latin America has its own unique opportunities and, of course, challenges. Building trust can enable and empower stakeholders to create regional approaches, regional projects and data exchange that can benefit the common good. They can also help accelerate the benefits and mitigate the risks of the use of data. Open data, as a general matter, can promote the use and sharing of data for the common good. This is the premise of our work on the Data for Common Purpose initiative. The innovation in this region, of course, is based on common challenges in a post-COVID world, which has accelerated awareness of the need to use and exchange data in ways that benefit society and local communities. The powerful experiments we're seeing in Colombia and Brazil in particular are emblematic of this new approach. It's now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for our panel, Stephan Verpulse, who's the co-founder and Chief Research and Development Officer, of the Governance Laboratory at New York University. Stephan, over to you.
Thanks so much, Sheila, and thanks, Didier, for also setting I think I need to wait for the music to end. Thanks so much for this introduction. And actually, that has made my life much easier. As mentioned, I'm indeed Stephan Verpulse. I'm the co-founder of GovLab. And at GovLab, we are focusing on how do we transform the way we make decisions using new technologies and science. And specifically, one area, of course, has been focused on how can we leverage data in order to improve the way we go about making decisions, solving public problems, designing public services, but also enabling economic transformation. And our focus is global. And so I'm delighted today to actually focus with a distinguished panel on what's happening in Latin America, what are the challenges, but also what can we learn from what's happening in this region that we can apply in other regions. As Didier already mentioned, data has a great potential to transform the way we go about making decisions. It can allow us to better understand the current situation. It allows us to see causalities in order to address those kinds of patterns. It allows us to predict possible trends and developments that we can anticipate. And it also allows us to understand what is the impact of certain kinds of interventions. And more importantly, it allows us to experiment in order to really figure out what works best in an environment that is rapidly changing. And those potentials are especially important in areas where there are scarce resources, but also in areas where there is an increased urgency to act. And we've also, and all have experienced indeed during COVID-19, that data can be a real tool in order to guide what can we do in order to address a pandemic that is rapidly changing and that is very dynamic, similar to other trends and challenges that we are experiencing. Now, in order for data to be an asset, and again, I'm referring to what Didier introduced us earlier, we need obviously a trusted environment for exchanging data that is guided by common rules and common standards. But also we need an infrastructure, and not only a technical infrastructure, we need a governance infrastructure and also a human infrastructure. And those are the issues that we're going to address today. And we're going to specifically focus on, as already mentioned, how can we transfer and transform Latin America in order to become a data-driven society that can leverage data as an asset, but do so in a responsible way as well. And we're going to focus on three areas. One is really what is happening at the governance area. And as Sheila already referred to, there is a lot happening with regard to cross-border data sharing and how can we develop a common governance structure. But also there's a lot happening within countries like Colombia and Brazil that we will feature. Second area that we will feature is really about what's happening in actually the exchange of data, both at the level of open data, but also at the level of accessing non-traditional data assets for instance, society and common purposes. And then the third area is exactly focused on what are some of the common purposes, and more importantly, the use of data for the common good, and what can we learn from that, and how can we ultimately accelerate. With that, enough introduction from my end, because we have an amazing reflect on those issues, and I'm delighted to introduce very quickly the panel, and then each of them will probably reflect on some of the areas that they have worked on, so that I don't need to introduce them in a longish way as well. And most of course, their bio are available on the program as well. But let me introduce, first of all, Maria Lucia Villalba, who is the presidential advisor for Colombia's digital transformation. Welcome, Maria. Then we have Fabrizio Scrolini, who is a long-standing, of course, scholar, but more importantly, actor in the space of open data and data in general, and is also leading the research, but more than that, of the Iniciativa Latinoamericano Datos Abiertos. So that was, Fabrizio, as good as I could say it. Ultimately, ILDA is easier for me to pronounce, so I will refer to that moving forward. And then we have Kimberly Bella, who is the Senior Director of Global Strategic Initiatives at Visa, but also, of course, related to the data and, anyway, a steering and an important force behind the Data for Common Purpose initiative at the World Economic Forum. And then, last but not least, we have Bruno Künzler-Roris Pontes, who is the Director of Data and Artificial Intelligence at Innova HC, and has done a lot of work around social impact of artificial intelligence, but also how do we steer data in a responsible way. And as you can see, we have an amazing panel that will reflect on some of the topics that I introduced. And the first area is indeed, what can we do in order to strengthen the governance environment that would allow for that kind of trusted exchange, but also for the infrastructure that we need. And so over to you, Maria Lucia. You've done a lot of work around building a national data infrastructure plan within Colombia that will exactly try to accelerate the use of data in a trusted and responsible way, and eager to learn what are the main components of the plan, but also what are some of the challenges, and ultimately what can we learn that can be applied across the region. Over to you, Maria Lucia.
Buenos días, un saludo, Stephen.
Good morning, Stephen. Thank you. Greetings to you, to our panel colleagues, and of course to all the participants who are connected into this Congress. So the national government has been working in digital transformation overall as a crucial element in the agenda of economic and social development of the country. And of course, we have identified the necessity of creating this data infrastructure. It should be robust for the technology, for emerging technologies as artificial intelligence. We have heard and we know now that data are precisely a strategic asset in every country for decision making, as well as for job creation. And Colombia has been undertaking major efforts in order to facilitate its development and access to data. Given the importance, the cross-functional importance of this topic, we created an infrastructure that would comply with some specific traits. One, robust interoperability, useful for the development and the design of emerging technologies, and also with an ultimate goal, a common goal, which is to serve the common good and the social development of the country. What we have done and the way in which we began was by creating regulatory documents. Why? Because we knew that this could not be only a policy for one administration. We had to leave this strong enough so that these policies could serve for the next 5 and 10 years, that it would trace out a roadmap for the country. That's why we have been working with the different public entities in the government, and we have created several documents for public policies. For instance, the 3975, which deals with digital transformation, states that we have to direct our efforts for the implementation of big data. There is already a public policy. There was already a public policy back then that was answering the needs of complying actually for technology, emerging technologies implementation in terms of IA, but that could serve as platform to other technologies. And then we also created Compass 39EB that seeks a full data infrastructure with an open data system that will enable us to develop big data systems within public entities. That was completely novel in our country. And for the implementation, we have been conducting institutional changes. We created this new office, which is fully devoted to digital transformation. We created the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation, something that we had not foreseen back then when we began these efforts. But we knew that once we had these stakeholders that could articulate these policies with the different entities of the public sector, we would have a huge impact, and it would be a long-standing effort. We know that it requires many participants. We have received lots of help from many sides. We have been working with infrastructure with the Bank for Development in Latin America and COFER. They helped us to prepare the model for this governance partnership by beginning by establishing a national policy, and they also helped us in the implementation state. So we know nowadays that this infrastructure should be addressing the needs of the technology markets within a context not only for digitization, but also for everything else that comes in the fourth industrial revolution. We have a goal. We want to create a market for IA. We have been working very, very strongly in order to use this technology because we know about all the benefits that IA can bring about, not only at a financial level, but also as a at the social level. We want to be part of it. We understood that data governance was really indispensable, that could answer also the needs of a business sector so as they can become more competitive in having access to this resource and being more competitive at the international level. Under this context, what we did was to start this implementation process. We knew that creating trust was crucial, especially when data tend to be public, when data, personal data becomes public, and data governance is an element that it creates greater trust. At the end, what we are expecting and what we have been working on is that precisely this governance system of public data can also serve us for implement other balancing elements that will also involve personal data that can also open the way to creating more trust, gaining credibility from the citizens so that we know exactly what they are doing with my personal data, at which point they are using my data, and which kind of technologies they're using to do so. All these elements, they need to be transparent to prepare precisely the infrastructure of data development aiming to IA and emerging technologies use. We developed a document which is in the page of ia.com.gov, which talks about data development for emerging technologies. And what we will be working on is in two stages. First, the creation on how this model should be, and next year we will be working in the implementation side of the model. Hopefully, this will be used as a benchmark in Latin America and the world.
Great, thanks so much, Maria Lucia. And we will pick up some of the elements also at the end when we will also have a video reflecting on some of the things that are happening in Colombia. But you mentioned already multiple areas of governance approaches that we will also pick up, such as indeed consent and how you establish trust, but also areas of interoperability, for instance, as well. But over to Fabrizio. And Fabrizio, you've been working in this space, but also you've been obviously working globally around issues of open data and data governance, and eager to get your sense on how is Latin America evolving the data governance space, but also the trusted data exchange space. And more importantly, we've heard from Didier, of course, that a lot is happening in Europe, but typically, when we talk about data and data governance, we compare Europe with China, with the US, and wondering whether Latin America is developing a distinctive kind of approach to the issues of data, such as the ones that were mentioned by Maria Lucia as well. Over to you, Fabricio.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Buenos días para todas y todos desde Uruguay.
Good morning, everyone from Uruguay. I would like to... I think that's a great question, whether Latin America can or not develop its own model, in a way, its own data contract or its own deal compared to other actors, other regions. I think the region has some strengths in order to do that. First, it has a long-standing history in terms of openness and transparency, at least at the level of regulatory instruments and field work. And today, it is at an acceptable level, despite the relative stagnation of the agenda. But That is a strength in Latin America. The other strength Latin America has is related to the human rights human rights protection framework. We have a very harsh history in terms of human rights violations, but that in itself has resulted in frameworks that have come to be appreciated by many actors, the business community, and many other players. Third, another strength that Latin America has to develop its own model has to do, ironically, with a challenge, but at the same time an opportunity in terms of inclusion. We have a very diverse population. So Latin America, therefore, has an opportunity to create new ways to include everyone when it comes to social and economic progress with a level of dignity that goes beyond the strictly economic criteria. So it's extremely important for infrastructure efforts to be led in the spirit of creating common good and the involvement of all the states in the task. When we talk about controlling infrastructure and developing data governance, especially if data comes from multiple sources, I think Latin America also has an opportunity to truly start developing democratic data governance models. And that has to do with some essential requirements. One, transparency in terms of how the data are to be used. Second, including individuals and allowing them to control the use of our data. And third, the impact and the consequences of said use. So in general, when you look at that, it has to be studied, analyzed individually. But because this type of infrastructure, just as physical infrastructure, has the big potential to include, but also the big possibility of excluding if it is not done right. And large physical infrastructure projects that have excluded, well, we'll have multiple examples of that. So I think that's where the challenge lies for Latin America when considering these type of projects. All in all, I think Latin America has an opportunity to come up with a model that is truly democratic. I don't think there's a single answer, but I think it can be a unique perspective compared to other the protection of individuals and inclusion for everyone in this new reality, in this new economy that is emerging.
Great, thanks so much, Fabrizio, and very exciting to hear about the potential for another model around data governance, which from my point of view, as you know, Fabrizio, is highly needed in order to really provide for that kind of social license to actually enable the access to Kimberly. Meaning this is very well, each speaker introduces almost the other speaker to a large extent. But Kimberly, you've been working, of course, on this whole issue of consent and trust, or a social license for actually using data and for the industrial revolution technologies. And specifically, you've been working in Medellin around something called Validel software, or I'm sure it's pronounced differently, but eager to hear, anyway, what are some of the concrete applications of what Fabrizio was referring to in actually the context of cities, and what are some of the lessons? Over to you.
Thanks, Stephan, and good morning, everyone from San Francisco, California. So yeah, I've been working on this topic of consent and trust with the World Economic Forum for the past year, and previous to that, with Visa for a few years, we've been studying the consumer and citizen angle related to consent and trust, trying to really understand how individuals, citizens think about these things. And what we've learned is that there's a growing awareness amongst regular people on how data is used and how data is, in many cases, misrepresented. So we have the Facebook, Cambridge Analytica scandal that kind of brought everything to the mainstream. We have a growing recognition of dark pattern behavior, which maybe 10 years ago would have been taught in a marketing class as a great way to get access to data, is now understood as something that is designed to manipulate end users and everyday people. And it's even being written into some of the newer regulations around the world as illegal practices. And then we, of course, have the many data breaches that folks are exposed to. That this year we've already seen a 17% increase in data breaches for the full year last year. So there's a lot of activity and things that are making this more apparent for regular people. And the framework that we've been working on at the World Economic Forum is based on improving trust through consent mechanisms. And we're looking at this from the perspective of government agencies that are looking to create data exchanges for the common good. So in the city of Medellin, it's around smart cities and programs that will allow access to services for citizens of the city that may not otherwise know about or be exposed to those services. And as these systems are designed and as the city thinks about pooling data and bringing data from different sources together, we're working with them to help them think about different ways to educate citizens on what data is being collected, how it's being combined, how it's being protected, and ultimately how it will be used to benefit them. And thinking about how this all comes together is incredibly complex, especially when you're dealing with some audiences that really understand the technology, and then we have connected populations that are actively online. We have a large unconnected or underconnected population who is just starting to experience using digital technology. And so balancing all those different educates is very difficult. And so those are the types of things that we're working through with the city of Medellin and helping them think about how to design those into the system that they're creating.
Thanks so much, Kimberly. And Bruno, building again upon what Kimberly said, clearly in some of those concerns listed by Kimberly related to potential misuse of data, obviously the healthcare sector is an environment where some of those issues are more sensitive and more concerned than other sectors. And eager to hear from you, Bruno, on how, because we're talking about data in general, but how, for instance, the healthcare sector can also enable more data exchange, but doing so in a more trusted manner, including, for instance, some of the issues that Kimberly was referring to, increased education, increased agency for individuals, and wondering how that is playing out here in Latin America. Over to you.
Olá a todos. Muito bom dia.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank everyone for the invitation to be here. Thank you, Stephan, for the introduction. Well, I just would like to give you a landscape of this and also the institution I represent here. So the Hospital of Clínicas of the University of São Paulo is a public hospital and is connected with the health department of São Paulo state and is the largest hospital complex in Latin America. And the work of Innova HC in terms of innovation, it is very much focused on strengthening the ecosystem of healthcare and innovation in Brazil and abroad. And because of this, we work with different partners. So we work a lot with governmental agencies and different research entities, foreign or domestic, with startups. And one of the areas we operate is precisely this, the use of artificial intelligence, specifically for healthcare in different applications, either clinical, operational, or finance applications. When we speak about algorithm impact, it is very fast to see that the healthcare area has to be a high-risk sector because it uses a sensitive personal data and it uses solutions that have a direct consequence on the lives of people. And these factors are very important to us, meaning application in healthcare and the work with the different partners is very important, is very different, that we focus on the building of trust. This is the core of what we do. And we work with this in different three ways. The first one is the trust of the user. So how can we ensure that the patients and different partners can develop applications that are geared to healthcare in a responsible and ethical way? And here we consider different factors and use different mechanisms. One of them is institutional framework. For example, that we apply for research. The medical school of the University of São Paulo is one of the schools that have generate the highest scientific knowledge in Brazil. So there is this scientific background that we use, and we also have the legal framework. Here in Brazil, we have a recent law that was passed about personal data protection, and this shows the path for us to follow. Every project involving data that we have different layers. And the first thing is to ensure that data is always embedded, internalized. There are some projects that are specific gear to ensure that this is made in a very sustainable way, and consent of the patient. So there is a practice that we have been adopting in the Hospital das Clínicas for some time, especially in this time of data, and also ethical committee approval. All our projects inevitably have to go through a process of approval of this. Ethical committee can be local or can be a broader one. And in addition to the trust of the user, we want to create trust in other institutions, because when we talk about health, it's always important to ensure the participation of several different institutions in regard to the data, because we need to ensure that the biases that are integrated in the data are reduced. So we need more heterogeneity in the data, and we do that through more subjective work, creating links between the different institutions in the health system, because in Brazil, the health system is rather complex as a system. And so this is an objective work that we develop. We create this connection. It's always a very rational, objective work as well. So we work on developing projects in which we'll have a data connection between the several institutions. And we contemplate the interoperability that is very strong, and also machine learning techniques that help us to work with the several institutions with more trust, for instance, such as federated learning, which is a process we are developing in the hospital. And also, and not less important, we need to trust the data. So the health sector has an abundance of data, but with questionable quality. So especially when you contemplate the lower levels of health and public health. So a work we have been developing at the hospital for several years is to organize these data that we have together with our partners to ensure that the data collected can be used in an optimized way through flows of machine learning,
which are more intense and examine the data better. We do that to ensure that the data is of high quality and we are able to identify the possible biases in existence as fast as possible. This is how we define that we need to do to develop our projects at the hospital together with the health system ecosystem in Brazil, and we believe to be fundamental for the development of AI and projects related to data in Brazil and outside, of course.
Thanks so much, Bruno. Very interesting, and again, it would be anyway. It's interesting to see how a new model is indeed emerging, where you have those multiple stakeholders part of the design of the governance framework and also the use to a large extent. And talking about anyway some kind of a distinctive feature, and I think anyway today's discussion is already, from my point of view, distinctive because we already have mentioned several times the common good, that ultimately that data governance and data exchange needs to serve the common good. And I would like to anyway hone in on that for the last round here of questions, because I think that again to anyway build upon what Fabrizio was saying, that in itself could be a distinctive way of thinking about data governance, and if there is a way to actually serve and approach the common good. But obviously, the question is then, how do we define the common good, and ultimately, how do we define it across countries to a large extent as well, and within the region? And over to you, Kimberly, wondering whether you have, anyway, in the work that you've been doing, both at Visa, but also, of course, at the World Economic Forum, whether you have anyway explored areas on how and the common good can be met, and more importantly, how it can be defined in a way that actually serves cross-regional objectives. Over to you.
Thanks, Stephan. For the work that we've been doing, not to be or sound naive, knowing that there are many technological challenges here, but a utopian outcome would really be for all individuals and citizens around the world whose data is collected, used, or shared in a data exchange for the common good to be directly aware of any data transaction and cognizant that sensitive or personal data is being generated and could be accessed by multiple entities. So having that ability to understand what's happening and making informed choices on where their data actually goes is really the key. And so building that informed choice in different parts of the world is what we really need to think about doing. And or cross-border data flow perspective, if we think about all of the regulations that are emerging around the world, they're all aimed at helping consumers or helping citizens. And that's what they're established to do, to make things better for citizens. They don't get it right every time, and it's a process and it will evolve, but that is their end goal, about building consent mechanisms in all of these systems that are standardized in as much a way as they can be, that focus on education and communicating to the end citizen the same exact way for different purposes. So a healthcare use case, for instance, you can think about what are the standard way that you could communicate a consent experience to each citizen of each country that's contributing in a way that you can translate across borders. So even in situations where there are data localization laws, you can translate what an individual citizen consent actually means in a different country. So building in those standards into the system from the beginning and from the outset, when building these data exchanges, will enable everyone to collectively share data in a more seamless way. So there's no translation of data fields or translation of purpose. It means the same thing. And then you can learn from each other and what is most effective with citizens in helping them understand. And so there are lots of user experience and design approaches that can be used to help accomplish these things. But it really comes down to, working together to understand what is it that we actually want to say and what is it that we're actually trying to do, and make sure that we have the best representation of that to end users as we possibly can.
Already referring to healthcare as a possible area for experimentation, and more importantly, for a use case of the utopian vision that Kimberly presented to us. And so wondering whether that utopian vision is actually already happening in Sao Paulo or other parts of Latin America, and eager to hear from you anyway how that is playing out, and whether you have an example that you've worked on that can actually show anyway what can be done.
Sim, é claro. Essa é uma pergunta ousada.
Yes, this is a very daring question. And if there is already an application of that in 2020, last year, during the pandemic, we created a project that was called COVID-19. This was a project that was the outcome of a partnership of several partners and stakeholders in the private and public sector, from several sectors such as health sector and others, and government, that wanted to solve a very specific problem. In Brazil, we had a given scenario at the onset of the pandemic where the results that confirmed the diagnosis of COVID took a long time to be produced, up to 2 weeks to be delivered. And based on that, specifically, the imaging tools started being used, such CRM and others, were used to help the flow of diagnosis. And thinking about improving all this, we developed this platform that ended up being used by nearly 50 hospitals and clinics in Brazil during 2020, and became a repository of a huge number of images of people suspected of having COVID. And we did that with the unautomatized system of, to send the images to those hospitals. And here in the hospitals, we worked on that partnership with several partners. The project was approved. It was the object of research. It had all the authorizations that made it possible to develop it. And all the exams that came to this centralized structure arrived already anonymized. And we had algorithms that would process the images, the two results, essentially. The first one was the percentage of chance of this patient that was examined having COVID. And the second one was the degree in which the lung was affected, which helped the doctor to decide whether the patient should be sent home or should be admitted to the hospital or go to UCI. The algorithms helped the radiologists to identify faster the cases that were positive for COVID, giving them support for their decision-making. The access to this algorithm was 100% for free. Part of the data collected is available in a data platform that is open and available. And the data is extremely rich because it comes from several regions of Brazil, several institutions, several kinds of equipment, which ensures greater heterogeneity and inclusion. The project worked from May 2020 to the end of 2020, and we followed the use of these tools through the portal of the clinic. It's a scientifically new tool. We followed the use of this tool and saw how the flow of decision-making by the physicians were affected and how this impact took place, to better see what were the changes that were to be made in the algorithms in the future to ensure better algorithms and a greater result. The platform worked as basis for several researches that were developed here, and also for a public notice. It was a public challenge launched by the as Department of Public Economic Development to foster AI and economic development solutions in Brazil. The challenge had several phases with several pilots and tests and all. We finally chose 2 startups that focused on the development of research data and to follow on the development of this solution. The platform worked last year. It's no longer in use this year due to several changes in the COVID flow in itself and other aspects. But it was a little of this that we were talking about, this dream, this utopia we were mentioning. This was a great source of learning. We saw what worked, what didn't work, the challenges, the hurdles, and now the learning is being used to help us replicate this same structure in other challenges that are faced by the health sector in Brazil and abroad.
Great. Thanks so much, Bruno. And that's really an interesting example on what can be done and also, anyway, how we can learn from actually experimentation, and also an example on how COVID actually has provided us obviously with an opportunity to actually test out new ways of leveraging and accessing data. And over to you, Fabrizio. I mean, you and I have been working on open data, specifically open government data, for a long time. And wondering, now that we are moving in, anyway, the topic of this conference, the so-called fourth industrial revolution areas, where AI and blockchain, but also other tools are being experimented for leveraging data and providing access to data. How do you see, anyway, the ongoing role of open data in that space? And also, are there some lessons learned from, the amazing initiatives around open data in Uruguay and elsewhere that we should take into account as we are developing this emerging governance environment for the fourth industrial revolution? And again, big question. If you could be short, that would be great. I realize, I set you up for a longer conversation, but I do also want to make sure that we hear from Maria Lucia in a second, and then unfortunately I will have to close. But over to you.
Sí, thank you very much, Stephan. Muchas gracias. Sí, flor de pregunta.
Thank you so much. Yes. Yes, indeed, it is a very broad question. However, I'll try to be brief. What we have learned so far from the opening processes is that it is incredibly important to sustain them. Sustaining them require public investment. And therefore, for a country, a city can be called democratic, open, and about it later, but without investment, it is not possible to go any further. What we have learned also from the open data ecosystem is the need precisely of incentivizing these ecosystems with different purposes so that they balance out things at the end of the day. That's part of the fourth industrial revolution, so that the industrial revolution does help indeed most people instead of just a group of 4 or 5 dominating companies in a given industrial sector. And so we have to talk also about regulations in the open data era. A good regulatory framework is closely transparency and also to good data management. We are already aware of the value of those data, and definitely we need other regulatory tools. And lastly, I believe that the use of open data has to be considered as a resource to provide access to all the parts that wish to innovate. If the fourth industrial revolution is going to be based really on innovation, then public access from the government side and from other entities as well should give enough room to small and medium-sized enterprises in order to prepare a good scaffolding that is totally equal for every stakeholder. That's quite complex from the regulatory standpoint. And Kimberly, I share with you that dream, Definitely the system has to be independent and people should be aware of what we're doing with our data. But it's also a need for building up that capability in the mindset of people. Obviously, the state's role has to be developed. Education is required also so that we can gain awareness of living in this digital era. Hopefully I was concise enough, but we can develop them further. Thank you.
That was perfect, Fabrizio, and really rich. And again, I only wished we could deconstruct some of those aspects that everyone has introduced a lot more deeper. But I think hopefully this sets up the stage for ongoing conversation. And over to you, Maria Lucia. You will have the last word. No pressure on the issues that we've been discussing here. But obviously, we are still in the midst of COVID. Things are flaring up across the world as well. And COVID has obviously been a big human tragedy, but it also, as already was referred to by Bruno, been an opportunity to really, further the agenda of actually leveraging data for the common good in areas that matter. And it also has increased awareness about the importance of actually what we are talking about today: open data, data exchanges, trusted ways of actually accessing data. And wondering, Maria Lucia, how, are you envisioning the post-COVID environment as it relates to data exchange? And are there some elements that within, for instance, the national plan that you've worked on that have been updated as a result of COVID that now are only become more important? And again, if you could be brief, that would be great. And then I will close the session with a video around again some of the issues that you've been working on also at the National Data Infrastructure Plan. Over to you, Maria.
Bueno, pues sin duda nosotros desde el Gobierno Nacional consideramos que la pandemia lo que hizo fue acelerar.
Well, what we believe is that the pandemic accelerated the pace of some areas, like, for instance, telemedicine. We have already provided 10 million consultations, doctors' consultations. The pandemic, what it did was to be a catalyst to the use of technology. And that's precisely innovation. Innovation is a driver fostering digital transformation, and the government the gap between those emerging technologies and the regulatory framework. And these two aspects are essential. This was an incredible challenge, really. On the one hand, we knew that it was important to have a good regulatory framework for a nice or a smooth technology transition. But on the other hand, we didn't want these technologies to create fear or to be perceived as threats to the citizens. That's why we adopted the driven model. I will give you two concrete examples regarding the regulatory framework. We created first pilot learning or experimenting spaces in order to develop a regulatory innovation ecosystem based upon public goals in order first to understand the design and the tools that were going to be needed to accomplish such goals. I'll give you a brief example where we work on the design of an IA project led by the Superintendents of Industry and Commerce, where we tried to implement the conceptual model. We wanted to create a preventive experimental scenario for those companies that started to develop IA projects in order to create collaborative solutions along with the regulatory entities and the public entities. This is just an example how this project called Sandbox and the state governor office has supported us from the very beginning in order to use emerging technologies not only for scientific and economic successful projects, but really to open up the marketplace in the country.
Great. Thanks so much, Maria Lucia. And again, I wish that we could go deeper, but I think this has been a really fascinating discussion. And Maria Lucia, Kimberly, Fabrizio, and Bruno, thanks so much for sharing your wisdom and for taking time in your busy schedules to reflect on some of the issues that we've heard. And from my point of view, this was really fascinating to hear that indeed, within the Latin American context, we are actually witnessing an emerging new and different model than what we might see in other parts of the world, one that is more democratic and indeed based upon more engagement with citizens around what actually matters. As I mentioned, it's citizen-centric, especially if we are adopting the utopia that Kimberly introduced here as well. But also it is focused on the common good. And I think that's a real important distinguishing factor on really thinking about how can we actually leverage data to improve people's lives. And last, I think what Maria Lucia introduced is also very important, is that it has to be experimental and it has to be iterative. It's not set in stone, and we really need to have those kinds of sandbox approaches in order to really figure out what works, what does not work, but then also scale, obviously, over time. And I think those are really interesting strands that we can all learn from. And as a result, we will all obviously be following what's happening within the region, within Colombia, within Brazil, and elsewhere in the space as well. With that, the last thing I've left to do is to introduce a video from Danielle Gomez, who is a Deputy General Director of the National Planning Department, who will reflect on the importance of data-driven initiatives in Colombia, as already was introduced by, of course, Maria Lucia, and also focusing on the implementation of the National Data Infrastructure Plan. Thanks so much for everyone. Thanks again to the panelists, and over to Danielle Gomez.
Muchas gracias por la invitación al Congreso.
Thank you so much for inviting me to the Latin American Congress of the Fourth Industrial Revolution and to this panel on Latin America's transition towards a driven-based economy. The development of a driven-based economy, the transition towards a digitization requires high-quality data that will help us make decisions, design policies, articulate and create new business models, to deploy projects, to achieve efficiency, to achieve effectiveness of productive processes. And in that sense, it requires a series of important elements towards or around data protocols, interoperability. In Colombia, we have made major inroads in this agenda for data exploitation, specifically seeing from the policy of big data under the context of 3920 of 2018. Recently in the pandemic, we once again thought the importance of the previous work done and the interoperability that was required among the different actors in order to define policies to deal with important challenges. And with a lot of efforts of the public sector, the civilian sector, the private sector, we created solutions that accelerated this agenda for data infrastructure and high quality data as a source of value for the Colombian economy. In that sense, we created a framework that has as its main axis digital assets. And in that digital axis, one of the main proposals is the creation of the National Plan for Data Infrastructure and its implementation, in which data are precisely a source of value. We recognize that we need governance, interoperability, data management, and this plan will establish then a roadmap that will be the basis for the strategy of national data plan that will be implemented in the following administrations as well. As any other complex strategy, this strategy will go far beyond this administration so that we can truly make that transition towards a data-driven economy. So around this strategy, we will have mechanisms like data trust, data marketplaces, X-Road platform. The updating of the strategy will be crucial to face future challenges. So it is alive. It is a plan and a strategy that require the participation of many, many stakeholders. We have to increase, therefore, with this strategy, the use of data in a different way by the private sector on different sites, strengthening the quality of the data set that are available at a public center to promote mechanisms for data exchange interoperability, increasing trust in those data that come from the public sector to be used by the society in general and the private sector to increase and create dialogue spaces with the private sector to build up and implement governance models. So in fact, the policy framework that will be leveraged on for data exploitation and data transformation, i.e. trust and consent and safety for data, all those regulations were already passed on in 2020, and they serve as foundations to this new strategy. This is an important mechanism to create that leapfrogging in a quantitative and qualitative way for having data as a main asset. Therefore, the private and public sector will keep on working together to face those common challenges. This is part of the strategy. We're sure that with this, we can create new sources of growth, more efficiency, new jobs, new opportunities for a dialogue and information exchange among different actors of the society. Thank you so much.
Danielle, gracias, y a todos los panelistas.
Danielle, thank you so much, and to all the panelists, thank you so much for your participation. Let's continue now with a segment of ethical and regulatory frameworks for the responsible use of emerging technologies. And in order to talk about responsible use of emerging technologies, we have invited Norberto Andrade, who is the leader of global policy for digital ethics and artificial intelligence in Meta. Norberto is an expert in public policies and in IA and digital ethics. He is a researcher. He works in the interaction between law, governance, and new technologies. He is a leader of Meta, Facebook global policies for IA governance and digital ethics. He is a creator of Open Loop, an experimental governance, global governance program that closes the gap between technology innovation and the regulatory framework. Norberto, go ahead.
Norberto, ¿me escuchas?
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much to WEF and the status for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, Brazil and Colombia to participate in this event. It is an honor to be able to speak about the work that I've been developing in artificial intelligence, ethics, and public policies. And above all, to do it in Portuguese. It's not many times that I'm able to speak in Portuguese to a large audience. Thank you very much to World Economic Forum for putting up this event. The governance of AI is something very complex and broad. And there are several subtopics that I could deal, and I'm going to speak about the challenge of regulatory issues and also the interactive experimental aspect and how can we approach this challenge. As you all know, AI is becoming a growing activity, and as such, there are major aspects involved in it, especially about regulations and definitions of concepts and coexistence and interaction with existing frameworks, just to name a few. And AI, from the technical aspect, it also shows some challenges that are interesting. And we have to decide which type of recommendation will be the most appropriate, viable, and integrative. It's not easy. In the future, regulation will have to see the complexity of technology and anticipate the effects individually and collectively, and also to produce or to see the rise of the impacted people in terms of digital autonomy and also prejudice, and also have to coordinate and find its space in the existing universe to avoid contradictions, duplications, and legal problems. As technology, AI also shows challenges that are additional due to its intrinsic complexity, opacity, dynamic nature, and the difficulty to measure its precise impact. In order to answer these questions and to face all these challenges, we believe that we require more experimentation and regulatory innovation in AI. New rules are necessary, no doubt about it, but the key argument is they have to be tested and tested before being enacted. This is why regulation of AI must be based on evidence and programs and methodologies that are specific, like sandbox, regulatory sandbox, and prototyping or policy prototyping. These methodologies provide a field of tests in order to assess different approaches and regulatory models of AI, in order to understand its real impact and also to see how they work in reality. And all of this has to be made before they go live. And one way to do this kind of regulatory experimentation is through partnerships and programs of engagement. Open Loop is an experimental program of governance led by a consortium of stakeholders, including policymakers and technology companies. So those who develop technologies, and those who deploy it, and those who regulate it. The purpose is to propose recommendations that are pragmatic and empirical based on knowledge and technical knowledge. Open Loop is a set of experimental policies using different methodologies. Through regulatory sandbox, we can contribute to the assessment and improvement of legal frameworks that are existing. In policy prototyping, we can support the co-creation and test new governance structures. Before going deeper into the open loop, I just want to distinguish these two methodologies, so the regulatory sandbox and policy prototyping. Both of them belong to the family of experimental family, but the tasks they perform are different and they also operate in different contexts, so different regulatory contexts. Regulatory sandbox operate in a context of the existing legislation, and they allow the tests under the supervision of a regulating agency. Regulatory sandbox are useful because they try to reformulate existing rules to accommodate advances in technology. For example, regulatory sandbox are used everywhere to experiment changes in the finance rules, like the fintechs. In order to accommodate these new applications of finance use, public policy operates according to the existing legislation. They allow experimenting a new structure that has to do with regulations. So it's not only updating and reviewing an existing legal framework, they just accommodate a new technology. So regulatory sandboxes tend to be more formal. They operate within the constraints of the existing legislation. And in the case of fintechs, they test the same legislation, considering the application of the legal requirements. And with this, we have a lighter regulatory setting for those who are in this field. Public policy does not target specific legislation and just to make them less strict. Policy prototyping adds and co-creates new regulation exposures that also help to work on the legislative processes. And it also provides a platform of experimental governance that is more holistic. And it also uses different regulatory and non-regulatory tools. Because of the difficulty to evaluate the best level to use governance tools, regulations, ethical principles, or standards, or code of conduct, public policy prototyping can be a platform to test in order to see the best combination of all these tools. Open Loop mobilizes a group of public and private actors or players. We work with partners in the industry, academia, members of the civil society, and Open Loop is a consortium. It is also like an innovation lab for regulations that tests normative ideas. This can be based on bills of law or many other things. And all of these consider emerging technologies. So they also show propositions that are based on evidence in order to improve the existing frameworks and also to prepare for the adoption of new laws. Policy prototyping also leads us to normative prototyping. So this helps us in formulation of laws and regulations before they are enacted. So this allows the stakeholders to understand better how these normative standards will operate in the real world. And this way we can improve the processes in adopting technology. In terms of procedure, Open Loop comprises 4 steps. First, we gather the technology companies. In this case, startups that offer services or products based on AI and machine learning. Secondly, we create together with the participants of these companies, but also with academia and regulating agencies, normative prototyping related to AI, like fairness and ethical principles. Secondly, we have the participants and the regulatory prototyping. We request the participants to comply with the rules of the prototyping in their specific applications of AI. And during this process, we just observe. We collect the feedback from them, and this feedback is provided while they adopt or they enforce these rules. There are several issues involved to see to what extent the prototypes are operational, clear, and effective. And in this way, we learn the effects in the real world, and we understand their strengths and also weaknesses. And fourth, we use the information to improve these normative propositions and also to issue empirical recommendations to policymakers based on the conclusions of the conclusion and feedback received.
So we try to be as transparent as possible, and we publish everything we do, including the prototypes themselves. It's a global program. We are present in several parts of the world. That would be my next slide. For instance, in Asia and Latin America, we cooperate with the government of Singapore, the government of Mexico for the sharing of personal data, and with AI companies in these regions. And in Mexico and Singapore, we are studying specific concepts and the processes linked to transparency of AI. In Europe, we are working with 10 companies to co-create with them an risk evaluation process using AI, and other similar impact evaluation processes are being conducted as well. The results and recommendations of this program were published in our first report, and this first program that was carried out in Europe co-created an evaluation of risk of the use of AI. Why did you start with that? First, because we saw that actually there is a great consensus on the need and of an approach based on risk to govern AI. Also, there is a large variety of standpoints on how to evaluate and assess the risks presented by AI. So everyone agrees, generally speaking, that about the needs of an approach based on risks, but there are several ways of doing things. We have seen modalities based on binary systems of low and high risk, classification of risk in several levels, more descriptive or quantitative or qualitative, or geared evaluation or made by humans. There are several ways and standpoints, therefore. So what we did was to create a risk evaluation process conducted by the very same entities who were responsible for the development of the AI systems. We call this an impact evaluation of automated decision. And this took into account the GDPR evaluation of impact. The organizations that are controlling things are the ones that are best positioned to evaluate and comment on the risk, and also to mitigate the risk itself. According to our proposal, we divided and structured the prototype, the policy prototype, into parts: the normative part and the operational one. The normative part was the basic document for the description of the risk, and it was developed based on several articles and clauses and disposition. And it is, of course, linked to legal aspects, and the objective was to obtain feedback on the part of the stakeholders and participant companies. The operational part was like a manual, so to speak. And we had the normative part, and therefore an orientation guide, so to speak, or guidelines on how to use and create also a risk evaluation process. And we look for several examples of that we presented on this manual. We had the taxonomy of the damage that can be caused by the system, and a list of examples as well. The program included 10 companies from Europe covering several sectors: health sector, computer intelligence, or financial services. What we asked the companies were a number of aspects and actions. First, they had to select a specific product or service that used machine learning and AI, simulate then the process of risk evaluation based on the normative and operational tools of the prototype, and then finally give us a feedback on how both the operational and normative part had helped or not the implementation of the evaluation process geared to see the risk. And we evaluate that based on three criteria: understanding, efficacy, and cost. First, we looked at the clearness of the prototype, and we see if the person had received the norm, really understood what was stated in it. And it was vital to understand. It had to be really clear, not only in order to comply with it, but also in terms of legal security. Then we looked at the efficiency. We tried to see how the prototype had helped to achieve the goal, which was to identify the risks and mitigate them in the AI system. And third, we looked at the cost of the prototype. What are the costs involved to use the prototype in terms of time, resources, specialization level, etc. And then we had the conclusions and the results. The results of this prototype program, and I will share my slide with you now, showed us quite clearly the importance of and the value of implementation of a risk structure as a practical tool to identify and mitigate risks involved with the use of AI. And based on that and the feedback from the companies, we created several recommendations. That's the next slide, please. And I cannot talk about all these recommendations, which I'll try to summarize very briefly, especially two that are especially important. First, the need to concentrate on a self-evaluation of procedure with a prescriptive regime with forms that are linked to high-risk AI applications that have to be subjected to high regulatory framework. So we believe these organizations will be able to identify, evaluate, and mitigate the risk if they follow a number of steps, such as the approach of the risk to determine what's the number of regulatory requirements that are to be applied to the companies that use AI. So instead of using a complete set of recommendations by default, they have to implement and see the context of the real risk. We think that the approach allows us to have a more balanced examination of the risks in response to the risks that are identified, a more customized system, so to speak. So we have a human supervision, explicability, the means of recovery, monitoring of requirement and risk. All these can be sent in block or applied in block, but with the use of and based on the use of the AI and the risks that are evaluated, as well as the risks that are calculated. To conclude, I believe that governments, through their requirements, should exploit the exploration of regulatory sandboxes and prototyping methodology with public policies, with policy prototyping as methods to examine the public instruments in the future. I believe this is an opportunity for Latin America, and especially for countries such as Colombia and Brazil that have mentioned in bills and strategic documents the need to promote innovation through experimental regulatory environments. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm sorry for the technical difficulties.
Thank you very much, Norberto, for your presentation. We will now move on to the final panel of this Congress. Ethical and regulatory frameworks for responsible use of emerging technologies. Based on an analysis of the opportunities, challenges, and risks of adopting emerging technologies, the panel will address regulatory issues, such as the differences between soft and hard law approaches, and the explainability and accountability of AI algorithms. It will also aim to engage the general public in strategic discussions about the considerable impact of these new technologies. For this panel, our moderator will be Kay Firth Butterfield, Head of AI and Machine Learning and member of the Executive Committee of the World Economic Forum, who will introduce our panelists. Good morning, Kay. Go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you so much for inviting me to moderate this panel. It's a true pleasure and privilege, and also to introduce such excellent speakers. It's a personal pleasure for me as well, because I have been thinking about governance of AI since 2014, when I was appointed Chief AI Ethics Officer of an AI company. And it's such a pleasure to find that everybody else is now joining us on this journey. I want to start by introducing Esther Prestes, who actually has been on this journey with me as part of the IEEE work for a very large number of years, prehistory, I suppose, in AI ethics terms. He's a member of the United Nations Secretary General High-Level Panel on Digital Cooperation, an IEEE Tech Ethics Ambassador, chair of the IEEE Peace 7007 series, and a full professor of the Universidad Federal do Rio Grande do Sul. Also, we are privileged to have with us Selena Bottino, who is director at ITS Rio in the Technology and Society Institute. I'm pleased also to be able to introduce you to Carlos Santiso, who is corporate director, governance practice, innovation, digital innovation at the government, in government at the Development Bank of Latin America. He's also a member of the Advisory Council on Anti-Corruption at the World Economic Forum and a member of the Advisory Group on Public Governance at the United Nations. And last but by no means least, we're pleased to have with us Nicole Foster, who is the Director of AWS Global, AI and Machine Learning, and Canada Public Policy at Amazon. What a truly illustrious panel. Welcome to all of you. Carlos, may I start with you, asking you the question, many countries in Latin America have already adopted digital transformation strategies, and some have even created strategies for emerging technologies such as national AI plans. What are some of the best practices that you've come across out of these national strategies, and how can we improve?
No, I thank you, Kay, for the introduction, and also thank you for the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution for the invitation. And oh boy, Kay, you were right. I mean, this year has been quite a fantastic year for advances in AI regulations around the world, especially on the ethics front. And just last week, UNESCO has adopted the a resolution for ethical framework guiding artificial intelligence. And we've seen also the government of the UK, for example, adopting, a new important and interesting standards of transparency in algorithm use in the public sector. So there's been a lot of action going on in this space, especially around governments trying to regulate the use of artificial intelligence by the private sector. And we've seen a lot of governments in Latin America also coming into these discussions. A lot of governments have adopted artificial intelligence strategies to guide the deployment of those. We're listening to Colombia, to Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, Uruguay. A number of countries have really moved forward in terms of trying to think about how best to take advantage of AI, but also mitigating some of the risks. And I think one of the things that is striking in these efforts is really, the role of governments in the AI space that has focused especially around the role as a regulator, as trying to guide the use of AI in the private, for the economy. But some quite interesting good practices we see emerging from our perspective in the Development Bank of Latin America. One is really this effort to invest in AI, putting really AI in terms of a core priority of governments, really taking really conscience of the importance of how this is changing a lot of things, and these strategies are reflecting these this effort really to try to think more clearly about the uses, the misuses, and sometimes the abuses of AI, but really how to try to balance these different issues around fostering innovation through AI application, but also mitigating some of the risks and preserving rights as well. So there's a lot of thinking, there's a lot of strategies that are going on. So that's a good thing in terms of how the countries and the regions are moving. It's unequal development, but there are some really good practices emerging. The second thing is really also investing in AI. For example, we've listened to the government of Colombia and how they really have been investing in AI in different ways. The first way is really like try to foster innovation hubs to help companies, startups, and others to develop solutions based on AI, providing, for example, in the case of Colombia, through Impulsa, the innovation agencies, these innovation hubs, say Emprenden, that are really trying to invest and help companies deploy these solutions, but also investing in AI through fostering more private investment in those companies that are deploying AI solutions. For example, we see large investors like SoftBank entering the region in a very active way. I think the other thing is that some countries, like for example Chile, are really also deploying what Norberto was saying also in his presentation around sandboxes on AI solutions, and really trying to move beyond the sort of policies and enabling environments to the actual implementation of those. I think the second thing I would maybe mention for the discussion is really also there's more and more attention to the use of AI by, for, and in the public sector. There's a lot of discussion around AI for the economy, but less for AI for better government. Yeah. And some countries are starting to really think about how AI can be a tool for the modernization of government. We see, for example, Uruguay going into this, having a specific strategy for AI in the public sector. And some countries like Brazil, Chile, or Colombia, for example, are thinking about how procurement can be leveraged to, how government procurement can be leveraged to promote some of these innovations. One of the good things we also see in the AI space in Latin America, especially in the governance side, is the use of AI to improve public management, to improve public spending, and including to fight corruption. And there's a lot of agencies in the public sector, like tax agencies, procurement agencies, anti-corruption offices, that are really trying to see how they can exploit better AI solutions to detect and prevent corruption in the public sector in general, in particular around public procurement. And we're delighted that with the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution of Colombia, we just published a report around some of these applications of AI solutions in the public sector. That was a couple of months ago, and that's available too. And I'd just like also let me to conclude here also some things around that also is emerging in the discussion in the region is really the implications of AI for democracy and the quality of democracy. And I think AI, the discussion on AI is moving from let's say more a technical space around as a driver for growth to a more political space in terms of some of the issues that are going on. And we see, for example, countries like Portugal or the EU declaration on digital democracy, Spain adopting a charter for digital rights. But there's an issue around what are the implications of AI for democracy and the uses in democracies. And in the EU, for example, the region looks quite at the uses that Norberto was mentioning around AI, the different types of risk, and these new regulations in the Artificial Intelligence Act in the EU is quite interesting in that respect, because they are forbidden uses. Issues around, for example, killer robots are really starting to emerge in this space. So there's really also a discussion there around the politics of AI in terms of the implications for democracy. And just one last thought for discussion really also is a lot of discussion in the AI space in the region that been taking place at the national level. And I think there's more opportunities to look at the regional implications of this debate, in particular for cross-border trading and cross-border data trading, for example. That's maybe one area where the region probably needs to do more and better to articulate regional approaches to AI and data, for example, data markets at the regional level.
Super. Thank you so much, Carlos. And you brought up so many points there. I just want to mention, for example, that the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy has also just called for a Bill of Rights around AI and digital. So yes, we're seeing a lot of new things happening. And also you mentioned the democracy and the use of AI by government. And of course, one of the things we have to do is make sure that when that happens, we don't just end up embedding some of the problems that we have at the moment. And so I really wanted to move to you, Selena, to sort of see if you have any follow-up in thinking about some of these issues around how, if government uses AI, for example, what do we need to ensure in terms of trust and transparency for citizens? Selena.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Kate, for the introduction and for moderating this panel. So building up on Carlos' speech, I would say that there are some things that should really be taken into consideration to mitigate potential risks. And I think learning a bit from Brazilian experience, for example, when
nós podemos
AI plan, there was a considerable amount of public participation on the drafting of which was put on the draft of the strategy, or some topics actually was put for public consultation. And third sector organizations, academia, and other researchers and private sector also participated on the consultation, which was something very positive, which we think that these type of, as Norberto was saying, these types of new regulation has to be a result of multi-stakeholder participation by the nature of what we're talking about. But then the strategy, as it was drafted and published, there was kind of a frustration all around because did not seem to be taken into consideration most of the comments and suggestions that these different stakeholders did contribute. Open up for having spaces, right, for people to be actually able to participate and to put their contribution on what has been discussed and drafted. And just to finish, Brazil has already a good track record of these multi-stakeholder policymaking, as we did the Brazilian Internet Bill of Rights, which was a real multi-stakeholder process that was a lot of discussed and debated, and with people from the technical community, since it was the first law that had this aspect of that was being actually drafted by the internet and regarding the internet, right? So I think governments should create and open these channels for these more enlarged and public participation in fostering this multi-stakeholder situation.
Thank you very much, Selena. And I think you raised two important points. The public need to come with us on this journey, because at the moment, certainly there are doubts amongst the public about the deployment of artificial intelligence. Even in the United States, 78% of people fear artificial intelligence and fear it should be regulated. And so having those conversations are just so important. We worked with the New Zealand government to bring a conversation with citizens about the use of AI in government. And I think that might be a good starting point for other countries. But one of the things that Carlos mentioned is that there are so many things happening everywhere in the world. Everybody's doing something slightly differently. And so one of the things that I think about in my role at the forum is, how do we all actually come together and think about these things in a joined up way, so that we don't just have legislation in various countries that is all different? So Edson, that brings me to my question to you. What's in your experience, what should constitute the regulation of AI? Should we be looking at soft law or hard law? Both? Should we be looking at it in sectorial ways or general regulations? And what are some of the practices globally on regulation of AI that you could see being implemented in Latin America?
Hello, Kay. Thank you so much for your kind introduction. It has been a real pleasure working with you over the past years. I'd like also to greeting my esteemed colleagues in this panel. In my view, soft law and hard law are equally important for us because they have a different purpose. Like if you consider soft law like guidelines or technical standard, first, they are not mandatory. They are adopted in voluntary basis. But they have a lot of very good content about how to move in these uncharted seas. Like what kind of procedures or steps I need to adopt to create some innovation, to monitor some innovation, but observe that they are voluntary. And also, the companies think towards these standards and guidelines as something that could add value to the products. Everyone in the world buy products, consider the compliance of this product with some technical security standard, privacy standard, and so on. In terms of hard laws, they are extremely important because they define the obligation and also penalties. So having only hard laws and not soft law, we can define obligations and penalties, but you cannot define how to move or how the company should develop their product in the way that could impact positively the society. So that is both are very important. And also we need to have soft laws and just hard laws in the different levels, not only in the regional level, national level, and also international level. International level, they could be general, because we need to deal with issues that are transnational, like you see with the data security issues. But not only with the data security issues, but imagine something that you have an AI-based product like an autonomous driving car, or maybe a healthcare system that are imported from a country and used in another country. If this system create any particular problematic situation, who will be accountable for the issues? The people that choose the buy or the people that develop it. If you do not have this transnational regulation, you cannot do anything. But in terms of regional level, we need to be aligned with our regional diversity. We need regional situation. The world are different. The problem that are discussed in the global south. Like I was some minutes ago in another panel organized by the UNICEF and the government of Finland to discuss AI for children, and they asked me how we can make the children have voice in the discussion. I said to them, first of all, we need to put the children online. But how you can put the children online if you do not have some electricity in some part of the country? Like in the Amazon. I was raised in the Amazon. I saw a lot of poor people that do not have electricity. And also, how you can make these people online if you do not have a digital infrastructure? So this reality should be discussed locally at the national level. That's the reason why I have a lot of critics about some regulation that are adopted in Brazil or that are mainly imported from the other countries or the other regions, because they are very nice regulations, but they do not reflect our particularities. So for me, it's necessary to have a strategy at different level, national level, regional level, and also international level. We need to consider all of them. We need to consider soft laws. We need to consider hard laws, and also take into consideration this particularity, this diversity that are present across the world. Thank you so much, Kay.
Thank you. And thank you very much for that framing and reminding us that there are so many differences between, in terms of our needs of artificial intelligence. And I know that sort of over the last 4 years, as we've been trying to put principles into practice, what we've tried to do is produce sort of guides and help to people that they can then tailor to their own needs. Because as you say, everybody's different, but there are some frameworks that we do need to think about internationally. And one of my concerns is that we are very fragmented internationally with everybody doing something different. And so, we've been trying to bring everybody into the same tent so we can talk together. Talking about everybody in the same tent, and we've talked about multi-stakeholderism, and obviously the forum, it always includes governments, business, civil society, and academia in its discussions. I want to move on to you, Nicole, and ask you this question. The governance of emerging technologies such as AI has often been framed as a balance between fostering innovation and protecting rights. I want to ask you if you agree with that statement, and also which stakeholders should be involved in those conversations regarding AI regulation to ensure balance. Nicole.
Thank you. And thank you for having me here from Toronto. I agree that it is often framed that way, Kay, but the good news is most of the use cases involving artificial intelligence and machine learning don't actually touch on human rights at all. So just for example, you might have noticed that Edson had his background blurred as he was using this video conferencing platform. And that is an example of artificial intelligence or machine learning, and there is really no human rights implication of that at all. And so, I would say that policymakers and governments around the world are probably looking to tackle the most challenging aspects of AI regulation, or the most concerning, which have to do with human rights. But the good news is those are actually probably a narrow selection of use cases. So at Amazon, we work with over 100,000 different organizations who deploy artificial intelligence or machine learning capabilities. And AWS launched over 200 such capabilities just last year alone. So you can imagine the breadth and depth of experience that we have, both not just from a technical standpoint, but also working with customers across different geographies, different verticals of the economy, and some of those include government or public sector customers. And so I would say one of the sort of key learnings that we have is that success in responsible AI deployment is extremely use case specific. And that is a huge challenge for policymakers to tackle. And so one of the ways in which we are seeing them tackle that is really, for example, in the EU, is taking a look at really differentiating between high-risk deployments and low-risk deployments. And that's probably one of the best ways to do that, is to really sort of focus on the stuff that needs attention rather than trying to regulate an entire technology across the really, really diverse number of use cases and selective instances. And in terms of key stakeholders involved, I think both civil society and technical experts need to be heavily engaged. The technology is evolving so rapidly that it is going to be very challenging for legislators and policymakers to keep pace with that change. And one of the things that we would actually point to is, and Kay, this gets to your question around the sort of fragmentation going on in terms of AI regulation, is the work going on in international standards bodies, I think, is extremely useful and extremely helpful. So these standard making bodies are technically grounded. So you have, I think, a really strong technical foundation in those discussions. And there is, I think, mechanisms there that allow those discussions to evolve at a greater pace than perhaps a legislative or policymaking process at a government level. So if governments can find a way to really refer to those international standards and deploy those in their legislative frameworks, I think it will help with both the need to keep pace with technology, as well as those concerns around fragmentation that you raised, Kay.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And you picked up a number of things. First of all, the international standards bodies. Edson and I have been working with the IEEE for a long time on this. We're seeing that NIST is definitely jumping into thinking about policy for the United States. And obviously the international standards bodies, we were fortunate enough to do some work with the French standards body around thinking about the use of facial recognition in flow management, for example. So I obviously have to follow up with Edson on not just this question, but also this comment that Nicole has raised about international standards bodies. You lead one of those standards. So Edson, any follow-up on these comments from you? Edson, are you with us?
Hello? Are you listening?
Hello.
Okay, I'm sorry. Hello? Are you listening?
I can hear you now.
Yes, we are.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes, we are. Thank you.
I'm sorry for that. In terms of international standard body, that is very important. First, because these standards are created in taking into consideration a diverse group, and not only a group from a particular country or a particular region, but group around the group. Like the working group that I'm chairing has people from more than 30 countries with different profiles. Like we have lawyers, we have philosophers, we have computer scientists, artificial intelligence, roboticists, and also people from the company, people from the government. What are very important if you want to create a fair regulations, a fair legislation, because we need to have these different views. We need to make all these different stakeholders to talk to each other, to consider different aspects of the domain. So for me, this global initiative like IEEE, ISO, EIC, and the other are very important. But we need also to equalize these efforts. Otherwise, we have a kind of a fragmentation. That is something that we need to take into consideration. I remember one of the work that I'm involved with is in the United Nations Secretary General High-Level Panel on Digital Cooperation. The Secretary General discussed our team, led by Melinda Gates and Jack Ma, about how you can create a governance mechanism to guarantee a safe world and mitigate risks. So we identified several mechanisms, several principles, several values and try to thinking about what are the most important and how you can also glue this different mechanism instead of reinvent the wheel. Maybe you could find some specific forum to join all the people together. And one of our proposal, which was to improve the Internet Governance Forum, because the Internet Governance Forum is a forum linked to the United Nations. And the United Nations is convening power. That is very important if you want to regulate it or to govern this domain. It's necessary to have the participation of the government and participation from the company and civil society. That would be perfect. But we need not only stay in the discussion. We need some action proposals, and we need to improve the Internet Governance Forum, like create some observatories, create some policy incubators, but international level. And this international level could communicate with regional and national level through the Internet Governance Forum locally. So we can have this fragmentation, but you need to take care about defragmentation and not connecting these different mechanisms. Thanks so much, Kate.
Thank you. And of course, I utterly agree with you that we need these accelerators to be bringing everybody, as I use the phrase, in the tent. So that's the purpose of us having set up the Global AI Action Alliance this year, to really bring everybody who's in these conversations to try to bring them together. And I want to move on now to Selena, please. You know, when we're discussing the governance of AI and other emerging technologies, there's a lot of conversation around risk-based regulation. What are some of the risks that you think about when you're thinking about using AI specifically in Latin America or the global South in general? And how are you thinking about mitigating those risks? I think we could have a whole panel on how we think about risk and which things we think about as risky. But Selena, try and help us with this.
Sure. No, as you mentioned, we could be here for the rest of the day just to talking about all the risks, especially when you're looking to the global South and in Latin America here. So first of all, I think when we talk about risk, normally we think can consider like consumer protection and or civil liability kind of risks, right? But I'd like to shed light on the risk regarding human rights also impact, which building up on what Nicole was saying before. And I think one example would be, for example, the widespread use of facial recognition cameras, which with the uses of AI applications, right? How would it be in, for example, let's take Brazil as an example. If it were like widespread in every city, in every corner, in any widespread use in the public space, how could it would impact, right, the human rights, for example, freedom of expression? How would it be impact on, for example, democratic protests? Like, what would be like the chilling effect that it might have and also when people naturally engaging and living out right in a public and open space, when they know that there will be always someone watching or analyzing. So I think that's something that should be and I know that's not, and one of the reasons why this kind of technology has been really discussed and also banned in some places. So I think that's something that's one, I would say one of like the impact. And another one would be is that one of the risks actually is deepening the inequalities between countries, right? So the uses deployment of AI need a special skill, right, to apply, to deploy, to develop, to use. So so countries that are still lagging behind on the education aspect are more potentially will be more have a potential to be negatively impacted, and there's a risk that happening. So we need to see how countries could develop, especially developing countries on the global south, should be prepared to be and to implement these new technologies and to say, well, there will be new jobs being created. Okay, but how will these jobs be absorbed by the current working force, right? If there's need to be a reskilling. So that's why we thought, for example, the Brazilian AI strategy should have another focus, should be also focusing more strongly on the education and how we will need to government will need to plan the education and for the formation and people thinking about these new skills that all these technologies will demand, right, to be applicable and to be and for everyone to enjoy all the potential and positive impact and the advances that they all bring, and also so that we don't have also this disparity of saying global north are normally the producers and global south are always the consumers. So how can so now moving to trying to another I think point that sums to this action point of inequality is the question of good quality data, which again we lag behind of not having not only the infrastructure as Edson mentioned, right? We don't still a lot of places don't still even have electricity to connect, and then it's not being the access to internet is still something that's moving, it's improving, but there's still a long way to go. And one of the points that we always talk about is like the schools. So even if in Brazil the schools are not still connected to the internet, so you can see how managed to solve. You can think about and you can imagine all these other challenges that AI applications poses, right? So moving to trying and thinking about how possibilities to mitigate some of these risks. I think it's moving back again to what I thought part of what I was saying in the beginning is this multi-stakeholder participation, and then in this case, including global South countries, they need to participate in all of these forums that are being discussed, right? And as Edson mentioned, it's important to have these different kinds of level and kind of legislation, being soft law and hard law, and think also internationally. So how the global South countries can be part and should be part of these discussions, especially when it's being or legislations are being drafted or discussing the potential impact, right? And again, I think this also brings to more diversity and inclusion in this inclusion process. At ITS, I think we organized an event back in 2018, I guess, which was the first one that focused on AI and inclusion. So, and it was important that the event happened with more than 400 researchers from around the world, happened in Rio, in Brazil. So that was also something important, significant to say, like, let's bring these kind of discussions to happen also here in the global South, and not just being like spectators and just seeing things moving on the North as is most commonly happening. So I think that's some of the suggestions, and just to start this discussion, which could take much longer.
Absolutely. And Carlos, I'm going to invite you to consider this question as well in a moment. But just picking up on some of the things that you said, Selena, obviously facial recognition is actually something that everybody is concerned about, whether they're in the global North or the global South. And we know that although some countries might ban them, the use, for example, in law enforcement, other countries are certainly not going to do that. And so I think that's one of the important places where the forum can play a role, because we can bring together those multi-stakeholder communities and really have that conversation. So you may have seen just a couple of weeks ago that we produced a document with UNICRI, Interpol, various police forces, and all those multi-stakeholders to really sort of say, how can you, if you are going to be using this technology, use it whilst also ensuring the political discourse is not stifled in a country. Just picking up your point about reskilling, I remember being in China a couple of years, maybe 3 years ago now, and the town of Tianjin saying that they intended to train 180,000 AI scientists each year. That's just one town in China, and it is such an important thing that there is investment in training and reskilling around AI. So, Carlos, let me bring you into that part of the conversation, that training and reskilling, and thinking about specific risks for AI, using AI in Latin America.
Yeah, no, thank you, Kay. And actually, I was thinking as Selena was talking about, yes, we need to be really aware of some of the risks, but I think also one of the points I was thinking while we're listening to Selena and the discussion also was, we also need to be really re-emphasizing the benefits of these new technologies on improving policies, improving lives, improving the delivery of services to people. And there's a lot of benefits that can be, deployed. And sure, there are risks that we need to be aware and we need to mitigate and we need to manage, right? But also not losing the focus in terms of the benefits that can be deriving from these new technologies. And for that, we need to be really clear about what the purpose is of that technology in a specific policy space and what the problem is. And really starting with the problem you try to solve and where the AI solutions can be helpful and how you can combine artificial and human intelligence together to solve those policy problems. And obviously there's a lot of issues there. And one of, I think, the risk that was mentioned also by Selena was really around making sure that you have good data, good governance of data that are nurturing all of these systems. Right? The second thing, also in terms of these discussions around managing the risk, is really, and there's a move in the region around policy frameworks for AI, and now for making it happen, and implementation frameworks and implementation arrangements and oversight arrangements that need to be combined together. And this is some of the work that from the Development Bank of Latin America we do, especially in partnership with the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution of Colombia, helping the government of Colombia, for example, of setting up an AI task force in the presidency to help agencies to deploy artificial intelligence, but respecting the frameworks, the ethical frameworks and the rules. And therefore, there needs to be really strengthening the capabilities of governments to implement AI in public agencies, and the role of the centers of government, both in helping the implementation in different sectors, for example, health was mentioned, but also ensuring the right oversight. And the third point I was throwing also in the discussion, which has been quite fascinating, is really the role of cities in this space. Cities have really an important role, and we've seen a lot of innovations, for example, in Helsinki or Amsterdam around open algorithms used by the municipalities. But in the region, there's a lot of innovation going on in terms of how cities are trying to take advantage of all the data that is generated in the city as an asset to improve policies, to improve the companies in the cities. For example, Bogota in Colombia here has created a data agencies really to make most use of the data that the city is generating to foster new business opportunities, to improve policies. This center is called Agata, and it's really an interesting innovation in that sense. Another city, for example, in Argentina, Cordoba, has created an investment fund on AI for AI startups that are trying to work with the local governments to improve the policies of the city. So I think that's also quite an interesting space to look at, not only at the national level, but also the local level, in particular the role of cities that are moving very fast also in that space.
Super, thank you. And I think that actually takes us back to Selena's point that we can fund startups, but if we don't have people trained in AI, then we don't have the startup culture that we actually need to enable some of this AI to be actually created in Latin America for Latin America, rather than perhaps what she was talking about, the North selling to the South. So thank you for that. As we come to the final 10 minutes, 7 minutes or so, of this wonderful panel, I wanted to turn to the World Economic Forum's project, AI Procurement in a Box, which we are currently working on with Brazil, Chile, and Colombia. We started this work with the UK. They adopted it in July of 2020. And the reason that we wanted to do the work, or they were interested in doing the work, is that it provides a sort of soft law option to regulation. So if the government sets its stall out and says, this is the sort of AI we would procure because we want it to be transparent and fair, etc., then that means that actually everybody working in AI in the UK knows what the government wants of them. And so you don't need regulation because of that. The other piece was, as Carlos mentioned, startups. Once you have startups who know what is required of them, and you allow them to sell to governments, which is often a problem, then again, you can create that startup ecosystem. So I want to bring Nicole back into this conversation. Our project, AI Procurement in a Box, looks at how governments can procure, innovate effectively and ethically in AI. Currently being implemented in Brazil, Chile, and Colombia. As somebody from the business sector, do you think that governments can lead by example, shaping norms in this way? Or as business, would you actually prefer to have some hard and fast rules that you know you've got to follow? Nicole?
I desperately want to be optimistic about this, Kay, but I'll be honest with you. Governments are very, very challenged at procuring technology in general. And the more rules they create actually doesn't necessarily enable smaller companies. It actually is a barrier to smaller companies. So, I mean, I work for a very large multinational company, and we find it extremely challenging to participate in government procurement in every jurisdiction, not even in just, particular jurisdictions. And so those barriers are even higher for smaller companies. And so I would actually even defer, rather than governments coming up with procurement criteria, I would actually suggest that the procurement criteria would again refer to those international standards. Because if you have international standards that you build to and that you procure based on, then that small company maybe that gets their first contract with the government in Brazil can then even potentially, that's a huge validator for them to then be able to export that same solution to another government if it's based on an internationally acceptable standard. So I would be just very, very cautious that we don't create more barriers to innovation for government and actually try to kind of simplify it for them. In my experience, what governments often actually do is they over design the technology that they are trying to procure, rather than present a problem that innovative companies can solve for them. And governments don't really have the expertise in the design process that technology companies would have. And so they end up designing a solution that could be far more complex than perhaps a solution that could be provided to them more simply. And they also take so long to design those solutions that by the time they have completed their design, the technology that they were hoping to procure is potentially out of date. So I think that the intentions of this are noble and good. My experience with government procurement is that it's already an extremely challenging space for governments, I think, to innovate in. And I think the fewer barriers that you create to innovation, the better. And that actually would level the playing field for smaller companies rather than making it so that only large companies can frankly afford to go to sort of spend those costs and invest those costs in competing in government procurement. So that would, and that's speaking from a large company, but I see that as a huge barrier for local domestic companies who are trying to compete for government work.
Yeah, Nicole, and we absolutely agree with you on everything that you've said, which is why we made this agile, why we had multi-stakeholder conversation, and continue to make sure that the business voice is heard as we wrestle with this problem. Selena, may I invite you now to add any comments that you wanted on this question about governments leading by example?
Yes, I will just bring in Brazil, and another example from Brazil, which I think is interesting, that within the government, that the judiciary has been the forefront of developing and using AI solutions to, as Carlos mentioned, yes, we cannot forget of how all of the positive and developments and improvements that AI solutions will bring, and to better, in the end, our end goal is thinking about a better public services, right, for people and citizens, right? So the judiciary in Brazil is here within our country, within the different, the legislative and the executive, has been like more organized, let's say, in the use and of AI. So they have already, for example, issued resolutions regarding the use of AI within the judiciary, very much inspired on the European resolution. So take into consideration diversity aspects of research and how these AI applications should be used and should be approved before by like a committee within the judicial system. And now we are also involved in this big project by being led by the National Council of Justice, which aims to digitalize really all services of the judicial system. And for example, creating even like a marketplace for companies and others to develop solutions that could be used by different, because Brazil has the biggest judicial system in the world, has more than 90 courts around all of our different states. So there is something that AI really can be helpful with, considering all the complex of our judicial system. So I think that in Brazil it will be a place to look for what and how they're being done and organized on this topic.
Thank you. That's truly interesting. We look to try to help India think about using AI in its judiciary, and one of the problems there, as people have mentioned here, is the data. Data has to be machine readable in order for us to be able to use artificial intelligence. We have, I'm afraid, just 3 minutes left. So, Edson, in 1 minute, any comments on government leadership?
1 minute. I believe one point that is not present in some of the discussion, it's about the human institutional capacity building, because as we discuss here, we do not have a good cooperation between government, industry, civil society, and the responsible for creating this hard law are the government. So But how you can create good hard law if you do not understand correctly the artificial intelligence, the benefits, the risks? So if you want to create the good mechanism, it's very important to understand the domain. So it's very important human capacity building and understand that everyone in the society, no governmental organization, industry, civil society, has a different understand about the technology, and you need to listen every voice. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So Carlos, you have the last minute.
Now, the last minute, I'd just like to take up on Nicole's point. I think, this AI space is also like an opportunity to put our governments and our states in a startup mode for the recovery. I think if we can really overcome these challenges of government procurement as a challenge to get these collaboration between public-private sector, between bureaucracies and startups, I think we will achieve a lot in terms of changing the way bureaucracies think, act, and try to solve public problems.
Superb. That really was within a minute. Thank you very much. And it's my absolute pleasure to have spent the last hour with our wonderful panelists and listening to your comments. Thank you all so much for being with us. And thanks to you, the audience, as well, for being with us during this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Y a todos los panelistas por tan valiosas.
Would like to thank Kay and all the panelists for their contributions to this discussion. To close this event, we will have a conversation with the leaders of both four IR centers in Brazil and Colombia, Eres and Lucas, who will discuss the topics we addressed in the Congress, as well as the upcoming project results and activities in our respective countries. Eres, Lucas, good morning in Colombia, good afternoon in Brazil. We've had a very busy agenda with wonderful discussions and conclusions. It has been a pleasure for me to be with you, and now I would like to leave you with the audience in Latin America and the world. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this Congress. There's no question that the information exchange has been really fruitful. Thank you, Maria Carolina. Thank you for acting as MC. I know these discussions have been really interesting. We're very thankful to all of the guests, our attendees from all over Latin America. That's right. Marcelo. Lucas, good afternoon. Go ahead. Dear Lucas, I would like to commend you as well, because this has been a wonderful, wonderful event. I think it has been really successful. Thank you so much for your kind invitation, and good afternoon to you. Good afternoon for you as well, for everyone listening in. It's been a pleasure to be with you. This conversation is going to be really interesting, but I'm going to apologize in advance because I'm going to be speaking in Portuguese, but back to you. There it is. Oh, that's wonderful. I think it is great. Before I leave you, I would like to pose a question, and perhaps because of the fact that I'm a journalist, it's something that I'm really curious about. The headline, what is the takeaway from these two wonderful days in this Latin American Congress? Eres, you go first. For me, it is clear that the fourth industrial revolution and emerging technologies are a need for us. This is not something nice to have. It's a pressing need that we need to adopt them. Lucas, you're up next.
Well, Maria Carolina, I think that what was very clear is the importance to have a work involving different stakeholders. It is not enough for you to be good in what you do if you are alone. And if you do not connect with all the network of government and academia, small and large companies, The result of digital transformation would not take into account the challenges that we have to face. As we say, this can become a problem. We have to engage everyone, and we have to have a multi-stakeholder approach. I think this is the most important thing that we can take away from this forum.
That's great. Big round of applause to you too. And I'm going to say goodbye now. You can go ahead with your conversation and give us some closing remarks. Go ahead. Thank you once again, Maria Carolina Lucas. I've made a note of some key conclusions and ideas that have come out of this meeting. I would just like to briefly present some conclusions and ideas about the 4.0 and Latin America's transition to a data-based economy. In terms of Agro 4.0, I think it's really obvious that demand for food, climate change have brought about challenges and opportunities for agricultural processes in Latin America. Therefore, the application of 4IR technologies will make it possible for us to tackle those challenges and drive efficiency and productivity, especially with smaller and medium-sized farmers in the region. Talking about education and training will make it possible to adopt these technologies in agriculture. One of the most important factors is connectivity, internet connectivity, because in order to enable the adoption of technology and to realize the value added they can bring about, we need good internet connectivity. It is also important to promote spaces for dialogue and debate where all the stakeholders that want to be part of that ecosystem are engaged, and to bring about the value added that emerging technologies can offer in agriculture. When we talk about our work in terms of piloting these projects to show small and medium-sized producers how these technologies can help them, this is really important, of course, to strengthen our own strategies. And I also think it's a good opportunity for us. I'm talking about the centers in Brazil and Colombia to undertake joint projects, because that is part of the vision we have as part of this event, to find ways not only to impact our respective countries, but the region as a whole. And I think there's extreme value in working together. Now, talking about the data, the segment on the data economy, which I think was a wonderful segment. We had very high-level speakers and panelists, and all of them agree that we need to bring together all the stakeholders in the various countries in the region to find out how we can take advantage of that transformation. Because if we can generate that value added for businesses, if we can turn data into resources, that would be a wonderful impact for the region. And it would be a huge opportunity for the region. When we talk about democratic data governance models. Of course, we need to be mindful of how important it is to ensure that happens and to protect the data of the citizens in the region. It is also important to have clarity about data and about how social decisions are being made. We need to think about changing the mindset of using data to make decisions only in businesses, in private sector companies. We need to do that also in government, and we need to base our decisions on data. We also need to think about public investment in the open data ecosystem, because at the end of the day, the there's multiple sources of data, and we need to be ethical and responsible. We also need to think about fostering trust. Data is a very sensitive issue for us. It is for us as individuals and for businesses as well. So we need that trust model that truly drives an impact that is positive for everyone, not just for those who benefit from those decisions or from the data. When we talk about proper data governance, we understand that they are assets to reactivate the economy, creating jobs and improving social conditions for citizens are key objectives from our speakers in the panels. We clearly realize that that is a huge opportunity. Lucas, please share with us. I would like to hear your take about the digital transformation and your take on the panels that we had.
Thank you, Eris, for your comments. You have raised very interesting aspects and that were covered during the panels. I just would like to take this opportunity to thank all the sponsors and our moderators and the panelists that made this Congress possible. It was a very rich discussion that we had. With regard to the panels of today, I just would like to make a comment of some of the aspects that I found very interesting. I just ask you to excuse me to do this. One thing that caught my attention is to how data can favor global economy. So the market becomes more globalized, and it allows many productive sectors to be more structured, and then these products and services can be more effective. And I think that it's good to highlight the key importance of reliability and trust between the institutions so that this market based on data can be really possible, competitive, and sustainable. And another aspect is that the citizens must have very clear how they can generate their own data and how this data is necessary for decision-making processes in terms of economy and social aspects. And they have to give their consent spontaneously for this data to be shared so that the society can enjoy the well-being based on this data. And data understood as an asset is also something that can generate more employability and can also help in education and social improvement. Now, in the second panel about the ethical codes and regulatory aspects, I think that AI is becoming much more important in the world, but there is a big challenge for governments to understand and regulate it. If this is not through experimentation in order to produce regulations, they will not be successful, because this has to be based on experimentation and testing, because otherwise regulation cannot be adequate. Despite the complexity of the last 2 years, this year was fantastic with AI regulations being enacted, especially for ethical use of data. Recently, UNESCO published its guidelines, and it has also been the UK that published another regulation on it. And this is just one thing or the other. But according to what was described, according to the hard law and soft law, both are important. It's not you have to choose one and the other. But the thing is, what are the proper aspects for each one of them?
The issues of accountability, for instance, and obligations must be present in a traditional legislation, and that must take place in 3 levels: national, regional, and international, because there are no borders. And we have to bear that in mind. These risks that are identified for new technology are often focused on the protection of users or civil responsibility, but there are risks for human rights as well that must be taken into account very seriously, especially we must follow very seriously the use of facial recognition. Much of the AI system does not affect necessarily human rights. We have simpler use. You gave us the example of this virtual meeting here with a backdrop filter, and that should be able to be used by whole society without much governmental interference. And the last aspect that I believe is extremely relevant, and I'll give the floor back to you soon, is the development of human competences. We are in a process of deep transformation of society, and often people are not ready for that. And we have therefore to look with great attention at the building, the developing of these human capacities in all sectors, the business sector, the governmental sector, and social sector as a whole, so that society understands the benefits and the risks associated to the behavior in this digital world. So these were the main aspects that I wish to highlight, without, of course, setting aside all the others that were exposed here. But I'll give you the floor back now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucas. Some amazing ideas and a lot of joint work we have undertaken. In fact, I would like to share with you that on December 15th, we're going to be launching a white paper globally about how Colombia is getting ready to have a data-based economy. I'm very happy to have had one member, Eduardo Gomez, from our team to have led this work along with the team in Colombia, but also PwC Colombia, the data community for common purpose at the World Economic Forum, and other C4 IRs in the world. This white paper contains many of the lessons about marketplaces for data marketplaces for the common good, such as data governance, architecture, data validation processes, fostering trust, and the potential of data in the digital economy. It's important to note that the white paper especially in the energy sector, is a global challenge if we are to reach global targets. Yeah, of course, considering the recommendations from the COP26, which took place in Glasgow. So the purpose of this report, with leaders from government, private sector, from academia, are meant to be a way to organize that transition to a data market. And the idea is to use those topics to find ways for us to use that knowledge and that expertise for more specific objectives and more specific projects. So that's an initiative and a very it's a success and something that we can use as a guide. So we are very pleased to announce that publication. So that's something we're going to be sharing with you, of course, and with the public at large.
Congratulations, Aries, and congratulations to Colombia. I hope we can keep on working together for Latin America. And well, the invitation stands for you to come to Brazil so that we can talk more about this topic. And I will share with you some of the next steps that we're going to carry out in Brazil. Next month, we will launch our public procurement guide for AI. And these guidelines have as aim to give very practical orientations to parties focused on ethics and to make and on buying AI programs. We saw how AI could be applied to public transportation and health in the case of the subway in São Paulo, and also Hospital das Clínicas, which is the largest hospital in the southern region. In the at the onset of the first quarter next year, under Aldo's leadership on IoT, we will deliver our project on IoT. It started focused on small and medium enterprises, and now we are moving on to the electric sector in transmission lines and the health sector with medical equipment, and in more advanced case of manufacturing. And the preliminary results are very encouraging, and we are going to increase the time of use of these machines, giving more access to health and to power for society, also reducing costs. There is also a data project led by AISA, and we are at the end of this first semester next year. We will deliver the guidelines on strategic use of data in health, how to share data between hospitals and the primary care level to improve medical care, especially with patients with chronic diseases, which are the main costs for the health sector. So I'll ask you to follow us in social media and keep an eye on this work that will contribute to the use of AI and emerging technologies for society. And finally, I would like to thank the for IR movement in Brazil. I would like to thank the federal government in Brazil, for the state government of São Paulo, and the members of the private sector, ABMED, AstraZeneca, Bracell, Eletrobras, Meta, and Qualcomm, who have supported us, and to all who have been here following us. I leave C4IR at your disposal, and I thank you for your time, and I hope we'll meet soon. I give you the floor back, Eris.
Thank you very much, Lucas, and once again, congratulations on everything you do and your future plans, because it is really wonderful. And in our center in Colombia, we are really happy to have you as partners in the region and to hear about those plans. We're eager to see how we can work together and bring about a regional impact. So once again, we would like to thank all of our guests, all of our audience throughout the event. We hope we can offer even more information about Latin America's transition to a data economy, an economy that adopts emerging technologies. And we want to offer new ways to use that expert knowledge and the ideas they propose. So we are here for you in Brazil, in Colombia, throughout the region. The experts at the 4IR centers are here to join you along the way. Please contact us if you have any questions, if you need information, if you want to be involved in some of these projects, or if you want to receive more information, if there's any other way we can help with best practices from the World Economic Forum, please get involved in our workshops, in our activities, and in our pilot projects. I would like to thank the 4IR Center in Brazil and Colombia, all of the staff, all of the team, and the Aventia production team. Of course, our MC, Maria Carolina, thank you so much for all of your help. Personally, I think this event has been really successful. I may not be objective, but I really want to thank everyone. It has been a very, very fruitful and valuable event, and please join us next time in 2022. We'll see you at the same place, Brazil and Colombia. Thank you. Thank you so much, and have a good day.
El cambio climático, la volatilidad económica, la inestabilidad geopolítica y las desigualdades sociales son algunos de los desafíos a los cuales se enfrenta América Latina actualmente. Por eso, como región, está en la tarea de acelerar la búsqueda de soluciones que estimulen la transformación y evolución. La economía impulsada por las tecnologías emergentes de la cuarta revolución industrial marcan un camino positivo como solución a este panorama. Por esto se busca potencializar una economía digital y establecer un lenguaje común para toda la región, teniendo una visión que fortalezca las estrategias, iniciativas y programas regionales que fomenten el desarrollo sostenible, apoyados en tecnologías 4.0. La transformación digital es una realidad y ha llegado aceleradamente. Las plataformas digitales nos invitan a transformar la manera de hacer las cosas, de realizar negocios transfronterizos al reducir costos y crear mercados y comunidades globales con intereses en común. Se trata de buscar una mejora en la economía para promover la competitividad en la región a través de los beneficios que ofrecen las tecnologías emergentes. Bienvenidos una vez más al Congreso Latinoamericano de la Cuarta Revolución Industrial.